steel, firearms, and the Industrialists crossing into another world. Hey, fanfic family! So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction. So don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 26: The Battle to Recapture the Capital, Part 3. Your Highness, the bandit leader Hales has been beheaded, and the entire rebel force at the North Gate has surrendered. At dusk, Duke Walker and Princess Catherine met at the palace, bringing with them Sir Hale's body. This traitor was probably terrified by the news of the East Gate's fall, charging recklessly towards our ranks, only to be killed by a hail of arrows. Catherine glanced coldly at the now porcupine-like Hales and ordered, "Take this traitor's head to persuade the remaining rebels to surrender." Immediately, someone dragged Hale's body away to dispose of it. "Your Highness, Lord Rupert and several other ministers have arrived." Catherine was overjoyed. "Bring them here quickly." On the day of the rebellion, Hales personally led his troops into the palace. If it weren't for Lord Mayor Rupert leading a group of ministers to stall Hales and buy the king precious time, the king would likely have been captured by the rebels. The situation would be far more complicated now. At least Catherine would be hesitant to act rashly. Therefore, Catherine was extremely grateful to Rupert and the other ministers who had held back the rebels that day. Although she had received a secret report that heralds hadn't dared to massacre them, but had only imprisoned them, Catherine was still worried that the rebel leader might suddenly go mad and do something irrational. Another reason was that if most of the kingdom's top administrative officials were eliminated, it wouldn't be easy to rebuild an administrative team, and how could she confidently lead the army south to quell the rebellion then? Rupert and the others quickly entered. "Your Majesty, we pay our respects, please." No need for formalities. Reunited after such a great upheaval, everyone was somewhat excited. Rupert asked worriedly, "I wonder if His Majesty the King is well." Catherine said with a face full of shame, "My father is well and has regained consciousness. He will be able to return to the capital soon. But you won't blame me for attacking the city rashly without considering your safety, will you?" "I'm very sorry," Rupert said frankly. "Your Highness, please don't think that way. Unnecessary pity is a great taboo for a military leader." The other ministers also expressed similar sentiments. Catherine was very pleased to hear this and, while talking with them, arrived at a council hall in the palace. "My father has ordered me to temporarily assume the reins of government until he recovers. Given the current situation, what advice do you all have for me?" "Rupert, the most urgent task is to stabilize the morale and order of the people in the Crystal Radiance region and restore production." Catherine agreed. "Yes, I would appreciate it if the Chancellor could draft a proclamation to inform the Crystal Radiance city and surrounding areas of the news of the rebels' capture, thus calming the people. Your Highness, please place the army under martial law for at least a month to pacify the region." After the rebellion, the Crystal Radiance government was in disarray, and the local people were at a loss. Many opportunists took advantage of the chaos and caused trouble. They all need to be brought to justice. The Minister of Justice also offered his opinion. "Yes, this is also extremely important. I will inform the army." XC District was the location of the Crystal Radiance Fortress's official grain warehouse. After the Royal Army recaptured Crystal Radiance, they immediately sent people to strengthen the protection of the warehouse, strictly prohibiting unauthorized personnel from entering. The sun had completely set by now. Due to the war, the residents had all turned off their lights and gone to bed early. The nearby roads were eerily quiet, with only the occasional footsteps of patrolling soldiers. 2 soldiers stood guard at the entrance to the warehouse compound. One of them yawned. "How boring. Hasn't the shift change arrived yet? Just keep up your post." "It's only been 2 hours." His companion beside him was speechless. "My stomach is protesting." It looks like someone's coming over there," the other soldier immediately shouted. "Who is it?" "Halt, don't be alarmed, it's me." The newcomer walked over calmly, smiling. By the light of the torches, the soldiers could see a chubby face. "Ah, it's the supervisor. Our apologies." The newcomer was the official in charge of managing the granary. They had met him during the handover of defense duties that evening. Although he was amiable, he was still a minor nobleman, not someone these 2 lowly soldiers could afford to offend. The 2 quickly bowed and apologized. Not at all. It's only right that you two are dedicated to your duties. Besides, I'm here to trouble you. What can I do for you, sir? When I left this evening, I forgot a very important ledger in a warehouse. Oh dear, I have to work through the night to write a report, which I need to deliver to the palace tomorrow morning. Without this ledger, I'll have to make something up. I see. Let me provide you with light and help you look for it. The warehouse manager was no ordinary person. He naturally had the authority to enter and exit. The soldier lit an oil lamp and followed the manager to a house near the entrance to retrieve a set of keys, entering the warehouse compound. Thank you for your trouble, young man. It's my pleasure to serve you, sir. The two chatted casually as they walked. When they reached a warehouse deep in the courtyard, the portly manager suddenly stopped. This seems to be the one. Let's go in and take a look, sir. The two opened the door and entered the warehouse, carefully searching it by the light of the oil lamp. It doesn't seem to be here. Let's look elsewhere. No rush, no rush. Young man, have you ever seen a play? The soldier was puzzled. Why was this fat supervisor asking him this? But he still honestly replied, Sir, you jest. Those are only for nobles and the rich. How could someone like me have ever seen one? Then let me tell you a bit about it. A play's plot always has its climax and its low point. I don't quite understand what you're saying. The soldier was a little confused. A climax and a low point are what make a complete play. The warehouse supervisor's expression gradually became strange, a mixture of a smile and a cry. The soldier was uneasy at the warehouse foreman's expression. What was wrong with this guy? Sir, let's hurry and find the ledgers. The foreman ignored the soldier and continued. The protagonists of tragedies often start off smoothly, then fall from their peak to their trough, and never manage to climb out. His eyes gradually became dull and lifeless, but his hands tightly gripped a small bag of grain placed by the door. The soldier tensed up, realizing something was wrong. This man was too eerie. He warned, if you keep doing that, I'll blow the whistle. But the soldier's warning had no effect. And the protagonists of comedies often experience an unexpected turn of events after their trough, the foreman said, and began to forcefully tear at the grain bag. So, is this a tragedy? Or a comedy? Just as the foreman finished speaking, the bag was ripped open, and the soldier's eyes widened in horror. The bag didn't contain grain at all, but sulfur. He recognized that stuff. Stop! Realizing what was about to happen, the soldier roared, drawing his sword and charging at the supervisor. The supervisor quickly reached into his pocket, then pulled it out and flung a cloud of powder at the soldier. A sharp pain and burning sensation shot through his brain. The soldier dropped his weapon, clutching his eyes and struggling. The warehouse supervisor picked up the oil lamp that had fallen to the ground. And who is the protagonist of this drama? After having dinner with the ministers and generals, Catherine returned to her room in the palace to rest. The familiar furnishings of the room eased her mind slightly. She removed her armor, took a hot bath, and changed into a dress. The princess went to the bookshelf, picked up a book of poetry, intending to read for a while before going to bed, but for some reason, she was restless. She couldn't concentrate on even a single line of those usually beautiful passages. Sigh, has the recent fighting made me too nervous? I've heard that many veterans become very eccentric after leaving the army. Catherine, you mustn't become like that. The princess went to the balcony to breathe some fresh air, her beautiful figure clearly visible in the night breeze. Suddenly, a bright spot appeared to the west of the palace. Knowing it was the location of the granary, the princess immediately realized something bad had happened. Sure enough, the bright spot rapidly expanded until a towering flame illuminated almost the entire XC district. Chapter 27 Artillery Demonstration. Your Excellency Earl Paul Gleman, we are deeply sorry for your father's death. We were forced into the battle. Fren Harbor will remain your territory, but if you would grant it to us as a place to reside, we are willing to offer you our loyalty. We will give you half of the revenue collected each quarter, and we guarantee that your income will be much higher than the taxes we collected before. This was a letter from the Shark Gang, based in Fren Harbor. Paul had it read aloud to everyone at the meeting. After the letter was read, everyone in the hall was both angry and amused. These pirates were truly delusional, dreaming of carving out their own territory, especially with the Alda army holding an absolute advantage. Paul took the letter and tore it to shreds. This is utterly ridiculous. Leaving aside the fact that the defeated pirates had no right to challenge him, Paul couldn't let them off the hook for the murder of his father. Otherwise, how could he face anyone after word got out? My lord, 2 fully equipped infantry battalions are ready for training. Please order the troops to recapture Franklin Harbor and completely wipe out these pirates, Bryce said, echoing the wishes of most of the officers. The Earl, however, disagreed. No rush. They're like locusts in autumn, they won't be around for long. Let's test our newly developed firearms first. If they work well, our army will be greatly strengthened, and we can use these foolish pirates as a testing ground. Everyone was very curious. Muskets and grenades were already impressive. They wondered what new invention the young Earl had come up with. Meanwhile, the Earl was in high spirits. The paper mill built near the Lord's castle, after round-the-clock work, had finally produced usable paper, and a feasible production process had been developed. Steward Ford was taking the first batch of paper to the Northwest Bay region, promoting it worldwide and finally opening up some markets. Nobles and merchants discovered that this new type of paper was indeed of high quality and low price. For just a few coins, they could buy a large stack, using it for writing, drawing, correspondence, and accounting without feeling the pinch, far superior to the exorbitantly expensive parchment. Another major buyer of paper was the monasteries in various regions. In this era, monasteries also served an educational function, naturally creating a high demand for paper. The paper currently being produced was still relatively rough and fragile, so Paul ordered the artisans in the workshops to continue improving the paper-making process, setting different prices based on product quality to meet the needs of different customer classes. Once sales opened up, money flowed in. Although the current sales were limited to the Northwest Bay area, and the profits were still small, the future was bright. Of course, as had happened on Earth, paper-making would eventually break the monopoly of culture and knowledge held by the nobility and the church, benefiting the common people. I guess I've given the wheels of history a push, he thought with a small sense of pride. In the forest camp previously used for training new recruits, the makeshift tents and low fences have disappeared, replaced by rows of brick houses and brick walls taller than a person. It has been transformed into what the Earl called a military base. The internal security forces of Lakeside Town have also been expanded. Now, a full company of 2 platoons of soldiers are stationed there. Outside the walls, soldiers with their hounds patrol the surrounding area day and night. In an open area near the base, Marlowe, Herman, Kelly, and others in charge of weapons development are fiddling with something, surrounded by soldiers on high alert. If an Earthling were nearby, they would recognize that what they are working on is a muzzle-loading bronze cannon with an early 19th century style. The cannon's overall structure was a simplified design by Paul, based on the time travel artifact, the Napoleon cannon, from his previous online life. The gun carriage, supporting the cannon, was simple, consisting of 4 main parts: wheels, a main shaft, a breech mount, and an elevation mechanism. The elevation mechanism consisted of a screw connected to the breech and an adjusting handle. Simply turning the handle raised or lowered the muzzle. From afar came the voices of the Earl and his officers. I'm going to name this place Area 51. Don't ask me what Area 51 means, just call it Area 51. Marlowe and the others rushed over to greet him. My lord, you've finally arrived. Everything's ready. The young Earl ran to the bronze cannon and affectionately stroked the barrel from end to end. Everyone, Paul cleared his throat and said, I've brought everyone over. Now it's up to you. Marlowe patted his chest, confidently replying, Yes, my lord. Thanks to the contributions of the pirate prisoners in the previous experiments, he was very confident about this public demonstration. A double-layered brick wall was erected 100 meters in front of the artillery, serving as the target for this test firing. Marlowe ordered the artillery crew to their positions, while the others watched the firing from behind a low wall behind the artillery. The 7-man artillery crew members carried a bucket of water to the artillery and operated it according to their assigned procedures. First, they used a long handle brush with wool-covered tips, dipped in water, to clean the muzzle of any sparks left from the previous firing. This step was not normally necessary for the first firing, but to prevent the artillerymen from forgetting this step in subsequent firings and causing an accident, it was strictly required to be performed for every firing. Then, they used a brush to dry the water left from the previous steps inside the barrel. Next, they inserted the propellant charge wrapped in velvet and a solid iron shot into the breech, and then used the loading rod to compact the ammunition, thus completing the loading. For the ignition phase, they first used a thin iron spike inserted into the ignition port at the breech to puncture the propellant charge to facilitate ignition. There are 2 ways to ignite the cannon. One is to insert a cotton fuse and then light it. The fuse takes a while to burn, and this method is relatively safe. The other method is to fill the ignition hole with gunpowder and use an ignition rod with a match cord wrapped around it to ignite the gunpowder in the ignition hole. This method allows for rapid firing. This demonstration used the fuse fire method. After the fuse was lit, the cannon crew quickly covered their ears. As the burning fuse shortened rapidly, it finally ignited the gunpowder. Boom! A deafening roar echoed from the 4-pound bronze cannon, and the powerful recoil caused the cannon to move backward a considerable distance. Everyone standing behind the low wall was startled. For a moment, the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble slightly. The Earl looked utterly mesmerized. When the thick smoke from the firing dissipated, everyone could see the scene before them. A terrifyingly large hole had been punched in the thick brick wall. A collective gasp filled the air. The power of that cannon, if it were fired into a crowd. Most immediately rushed to examine the cannon closely, while a few, including Schroeder, surrounded Marlowe, bombarding him with questions. After numerous tests, this thing can fire over 1,000 meters, fire larger shells? Fire farther? Of course, but only if we get more funding for experiments. With practice, it can fire 2 to 3 shots per minute, but frequent firing will overheat the barrel. Marlowe, suppressing his excitement, answered the officer's questions with a smirk. This weapon was actually created by my own hands. My initial choice was indeed correct. A military weapon. A military weapon indeed, exclaimed the old knight Schroeder. Big is beautiful, Captain Holman murmured, stroking the cannon, as if he had opened the door to a new world. Marlowe, fire a shotgun salvo to see. Let them see what it's like. Yes, sir. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28 Port Fulon. Dean Ithaca turned into an alley off the main street. After confirming no one was following him, he walked to the door of a house, knocked 3 times, paused briefly, and then knocked twice more. The door opened, and a girl peeked out. After glancing at the 2 sides of the road, she grabbed Dean's clothes and pulled him inside. Hey! Be gentle, you're going to tear my clothes to shreds, Dean protested. You have the nerve to say that? You've been gone so long, I thought something had happened to you. The pink-haired girl frowned, hands on her hips, clearly a little angry. Huh? The sun's risen in the west. Is the captain worried about me? Dean feigned surprise. You want me to beat you up? The girl blushed and held up a flail that seemed disproportionate to her size. Dean immediately raised his hands in pleading. Spare me. Hey. You two should know when to flirt, right? Susan's grandfather is still in the hands of the pirates, a tall, blonde young man nearby said helplessly. Then his face made intimate contact with the girl's flail. No one will think you're mute if you don't speak, you fly, the girl said menacingly, holding the flail. The blonde, puck-style youth, clutching his swollen cheeks, said miserably, Yes, Commander, I'll never do it again. Just then, 2 more people came out of the inner room, a girl wearing a pointed scholar's cap and a girl with a ponytail. Only the girl with the ponytail was dressed in Northwest Bay-style civilian clothing. She said happily, So it's Dean who's back. The 2 breathed a sigh of relief when they saw Dean return safely. The scholarly-looking girl asked, Dean, have you found out anything? We've actually gathered quite a bit of useful information. Everyone sat down around the table, and Dean continued, Fran Harbor is under martial law. No one is allowed to enter or leave. Apparently, the pirates ran into trouble a while ago, the hammer-wielding girl asked impatiently. Who asked you that? What about Susan's grandfather and our target? Don't rush me, I'll tell you now. I got a pirate henchman drunk and extracted some information from him. Susan's grandfather and our target are imprisoned in the church, but I checked the area, and the pirates are very tight-lipped. It'll be difficult to get close. So we need to find the right opportunity, the hammer-wielding girl grumbled. Why go through all that trouble? If you ask me, we should just storm in, drag out that shark, beat him up, and make him hand over the people. Dean gave a helpless wry smile. Captain, you have to consider the numbers on both sides. The hammer-wielding girl glared at him. Then what do you suggest? Dean remained calm. I do have a plan, which brings us back to what I mentioned at the beginning. Do you know how badly the pirates suffered recently? They lost over 400 men. That's almost half the shark gang's strength. The bruised and battered punk, clutching his cheek, asked, Who's so powerful? Could it be the local lord? Dean shrugged. I don't know about that low-level guy. You served in the army, right? You should know. The higher-ups often don't want these lower-ranking people to know too much. If the enemy is too strong, some might desert. They were only informed before battle and then pushed to the front as cannon fodder. He learned about the loss of over 400 men through someone close to the leader, the hammer-wielding girl. Could it be the Lord's army? Sue, don't joke around. Do you think our Lord cares about the lives of coastal civilians? They sold us to pirates over a decade ago. Before the hammer-wielding girl could finish her question, the ponytail girl blurted out a curt remark. The girl's expression shifted from its previous state, now a mixture of disdain and resentment, her small hand clenched into a fist. Those shameless nobles still have the audacity to come here every quarter to collect taxes. My grandfather, as the town mayor, not only has to satisfy the pirates' greedy appetites but also deal with the tax collectors sent by the pig-headed lord. And yet, many townspeople still complain about him. As she spoke, the girl's eyes welled up with tears. The scholar immediately placed her hand on the girl's back, comforting her. Don't be sad. Everyone's probably just saying it. They all understand the old man. Otherwise, why would they elect your grandfather as mayor every year? The girl with the ponytail wiped away her tears and sobbed. I know everyone's feelings. Being extorted by both pirates and the Lord at the same time, it's inevitable to have some complaints. Seeing the atmosphere was a bit heavy, Dean cleared his throat to attract everyone's attention and continued with his plan. Regardless of who caused the pirates to run into trouble, judging from their recent deployments, fortifying their fortifications and prohibiting entry and exit, it looks like the other side will be coming to Frankie Harbor to deal with them soon. Right now, there are only a few hundred pirates in the town. According to the information I've gathered, most of them will be sent to the city gates for defensive operations, leaving only about 20 people in the church. We can't determine whether the newcomers are good or bad. Since Susan said the local lord is quite incompetent, I guess it might be another group of pirates coming to fight. We can only rely on ourselves. We'll take advantage of the chaos to do this, and that, after everyone discussed the details of the operation, the girl with the hammer made the final decision. HMPH. It's simple. Let's do it this way. Sigh, if the rest of the group were here, that would be great. If we were all together, I think we could just storm in now. Well, what can we do? You took on 2 missions, Captain. HMPH. I'm thinking about the future of our adventure group. But speaking of which, what is our target, young Master Foster of the Horn Bay Alliance, doing here? He's just causing trouble. What other reason could there be? A rich young master like him has had his brain ruined by some nightly adventure novels, fantasizing about slaying dragons and rescuing princesses all day long. We can't find any dragons, but we certainly have villains. Wasn't this the territory of the great pirate Edward before? I heard that many people challenged him before, but none of them succeeded. They were all fed to the fish. Our young master is really incredibly lucky, just in time for Edward to be away, the girl with the ponytail said. Brother Dean, Sister Meru, I also want to help you, especially since my grandfather is among those we're rescuing. I'll go with you then. I know the interior of the church very well. No. That's too dangerous. Susan, just stay home and wait for our good news. The hammer-wielding girl refused outright, a serious expression on her face. Meruheimer, bet the name of the Lichman adventurers. And I guarantee to send your grandfather home safely. Meanwhile, the church in Fland Harbor had become the headquarters of the Shark Gang pirates. The leaders, big and small, were gathered in a room for a meeting, discussing their recent defeat. The leader, Shark, dressed in classic pirate attire, with a burly face and an eye patch over his left eye, said angrily, "No wonder Mudfish rushed back to sea in such a panic. It turns out the Gleman kid really has some tricks up his sleeve." A subordinate said, "Boss, let's retreat to C2. The men down there are panicking. Rumors are spreading that the enemy has wizards helping them." Shark flew into a rage, smashing the water glass in front of him to pieces. "Pass down the order. Anyone who dares to say another word, I'll rip out their tongue. You want to go back to the sea, living a life of drifting aimlessly, never knowing where your next meal will come from? Now that we've finally gotten rid of that meddlesome Edward, I'm going to devour this piece of fat meat, Franklin Harbor, but this land belongs to the Gleman family. I don't care about Glenman or Selman. What I take is mine." A former Quake gang leader who had defected to the gang looked fearful, but Boss Shark, their wizard over there, he quickly stopped himself, remembering Shark's order to keep quiet. Shark looked at them with exasperation. Use your brains. If they really had wizards or magic, the church would have already gone after them. Why would they bother with us, then? Confidently, he continued, they're just using some uncommon weapons. I carefully questioned the brothers who had experienced it firsthand and came up with a method to deal with them. As long as you wear thick armor, or even thick clothing, those nails and shards won't cause much damage. As for those tubes that can fire iron projectiles, they're just like bows and arrows or slings, only they fire faster and with greater power, and there are very few of them. Although Shark was tough on the outside, he was secretly afraid. He had seen a pirate who had been shot and he had defected from Quake's side. The man's arm was almost completely useless, and he died a few days later from a persistent high fever. But he couldn't show it openly, otherwise how could he persuade his men to die? So, he gave them some encouraging words, promising them many benefits after permanently occupying Fland Harbor. Inspired by the sharks, the men's men no longer seemed so fearsome, and they all vowed to follow their boss and fight to the death against Gleman's army. By the way, how are that old mayor and the young master of the Horn Bay Alliance doing? The old man is still uncooperative. No matter how much torture he endures, he won't admit to your lordship title. The young master, on the other hand, is very obedient, riding whatever he's told. HMPH. Once we hold off the noble's army, I'll have plenty of time to play with the old man, but by then it won't matter if he denies it. Keep an eye on that young master too. He's our cash cow. Yes, boss. Chapter 29. The city gates are breached. In June, after 2 months of intensive preparations, Paul Gleman officially issued the order to the army to recapture Franklin Harbor. At this time, the Alda Guard had 2 fully equipped battalions, totaling over 1,100 men. Thanks to the tireless efforts of Herman and others, in addition to traditional cold weapons such as swords and spears, they were also equipped with 20 matchlock muskets and 2 4-pounder cannons. Outside Franklin Harbor, the Earl observed the pirates' fortifications from afar using a monocular telescope. This telescope, made by an optician he had brought from elsewhere, was quickly deployed to the army, and the officers praised this powerful tool for observing enemy positions at a distance. Of course, the optician was retained by the Earl with a high salary. Franklin Harbor had already been fortified by the pirates. To call it a city wall was an understatement. Compared to a large city like Crystal Radiance, it was merely a low-earthen enclosure. However, the city walls were well defended. From afar, one could see large pots boiling something on the walls, either scalding hot oil or foul-smelling excrement. The pirates had already spotted the army gathering outside the city and had set fire to it. Not far from the walls, a trench more than a meter deep had been dug, and between the trench and the walls were densely packed barbed wire, spikes, and other insidious traps. Schroeder lowered his binoculars and suggested, "Attack the gate directly. We have cannons, a few shots will blast that wooden gate open. Then, using muskets and cannons as cover, we can fill the trench in front of the gate and storm in." Paul nodded in agreement. That afternoon, 2 cannons aimed at the gate of Fland Harbor, and the battle began. Load, aim, with each command from the gunner. The gunners operated the cannons methodically. They had trained for nearly 2 months for this battle, and every movement seemed instinctive. Fire, the gunner roared, and the gunner responsible for firing ignited the gunpowder in the trigger. Boom, with a deafening roar, a 4-pound solid iron ball, carrying immense kinetic energy, shot out of the cannon at 416 meters per second, striking the walls of Fuelin Harbor almost instantly. The pirates on the wall only saw a puff of white smoke rising from the 2 strange objects in the distance, followed by 2 loud bangs, and suddenly felt the wall shake. Although it didn't hit the gate, its power still greatly shocked the pirates, and screams of terror echoed from the walls. A ballista with a simpler structure but much greater power, the pirate leader Shark quickly judged. He immediately ordered his men not to huddle together, lest they be wiped out by the cannonballs. Reset, adjust the firing angle. The gunners slightly adjusted the angle and quickly fired a second volley. The second volley still missed the gate, but it shattered a section of the wall, and the cannonball penetrated the parapet, blasting an unfortunate pirate off the wall, killing him instantly. The fragments of the wall also seriously injured his companions on either side of him. Painful cries echoed from the city walls. Shark immediately ordered the 2 men to be taken away to avoid affecting morale. However, morale was already almost completely shattered. After witnessing the power of the ballista, the pirates cowered and trembled. With a deafening crash, the 5th volley of cannon fire finally struck the gate. blasting the wooden door to smithereens. The pirates lying in ambush on both sides of the gate were terrified. The thunderous cannon fire was now like divine retribution to them. Musketeers, advance! The musketeers of the Alda army, under the cover of shield-bearers, began to slowly advance towards the city walls. Archers, prepare! The enemy is attacking. Tell the brothers at the gate to keep a close watch. Shark issued a series of orders as he saw the musketeers advancing. He knew the enemy was about to attack. Pirates equipped with bows and arrows peeked out from the walls, searching for targets near the moat. But the siege troops they thought were attacking stopped about 100 meters from the city wall. At that distance, their inferior arrows were ineffective, especially since the enemy had shields for protection. A series of popping sounds rang out as 20 matchlock muskets fired simultaneously. Immediately, 4 pirates were hit, clutching their wounds and collapsing against the wall, screaming, "Get down! Get down! It's the legendary black magic!" Shouts erupted from the city wall. It was that legendary, evil weapon, capable of hitting so far. Shark was secretly alarmed. Why wasn't the enemy's ranged attack over yet? He thought they would fill the moat and attack the city next. And that was exactly what happened. Taking advantage of the pirates on the wall lying down to avoid the muskets, soldiers carrying bags of oil quickly ran to the moat near the main gate and began throwing it in. It would be too late if they didn't stop them soon. Shark didn't care anymore and roared, "Archers, attack!" However, no one listened to him. All the archers remained huddled behind the parapet, refusing to get up. Shark roared, "Are you all deaf?" One of his men, his face contorted with despair, cried, "Boss, surrender. We can't win." Shark chuckled coldly, HMPH. Finally, someone's spoken up. Then, his bloodshot eyes widened, and he roared at his men, "Grayman's father is in our hands. What good will surrender, do you think? Do you know the consequences for people like us who harm nobles?" His voice was utterly manic. Horrifying scenes flashed through the minds of the pirates. In this harsh era, when commoners harmed nobles, the outcome depended entirely on the noble's word. While a few nobles might pardon their captors, a story often told of leniency, most were met with severe punishment. Chopping off limbs was considered lenient, execution was commonplace, and even more horrifying was being tortured to death or suffering a fate worse than death. A lord once dealt with assassins by inserting a sharpened piece of wood into the victim's anus, leaving him to fall slowly to the ground, ultimately dying in excruciating agony. If they treated civilians this way, what hope was there for these pirates, whose hands were already stained with blood? A chill ran down their spines. Fight those noble brats! Under the weight of fear, the pirates' fighting spirit was ignited, and they roared to fight Paul Gleman to the bitter end. But being pinned down on the city wall and beaten wasn't a solution. The moat was almost filled in, and the enemy was about to storm in. Shark ordered his men down the wall to engage in hand-to-hand combat. As the pirates scrambled down the wall, Shark summoned a trusted confidant and whispered a few words. With another chilling roar of cannon fire, a cannonball pierced the city gate, instantly carving a bloody path. The pirates gathered at the gate, ignoring their groaning companions on the ground, scattered in panic to both sides of the gate. Arda's army launched its timely assault. 4 infantry companies, stepping on sandbags, crossed the moat one by one and stormed into the city. They quickly deployed, engaging the pirates hiding on either side of the city gates in hand-to-hand combat with their spears. The streets near the city gates were filled with the sounds of battle. Musketeers followed closely behind, rushing into the city. Taking advantage of the enemy being held back by the musketeers, they positioned themselves in a safe rear and opened fire freely. At such close range, they could almost hit anything they aimed at. With billowing smoke and the sounds of gunfire, pirate lives were continuously reaped by bullets. Disarm and you will not be killed. Disarm and you will not be killed. A cavalryman charged into the city, relaying the Count's latest instructions to the pirates, who were now divided and surrounded. "We surrender." Upon hearing that they could escape death, some of the previously fierce pirates immediately threw down their weapons and knelt in surrender. One led the way, and the pirates around him followed suit, afraid of falling behind. They didn't care about retribution later, they were willing to take the gamble. Within minutes, all the pirates in the city gate area had surrendered. Chapter 30 The Church. After the battle at the city gate, Paul led Schroeder and his men on horseback into Fland Harbor. He surveyed the port town closely. In terms of building area, Fland Harbor was more than twice the size of Lake Town. The houses were arranged in a more orderly fashion and were generally taller and more beautiful than those in Lake Town. From the city gate, a winding avenue led to the dock area to the west, and surprisingly, this avenue was paved with bricks and stones, far better than the muddy central avenue in Lake Town that became impassable after rain. It seemed that despite long-term extortion by pirates, the town had not lost its vitality. No wonder the Shark Gang had their eye on this place and refused to leave. As for why the Lord's mansion was not located here, the threat of pirates was certainly a significant reason, but a more important reason was that lords in the northwest region often did not place their residences in bustling towns. Many lords' residences were simply isolated castles or manors, without even a single house nearby. In Paul's memories from his previous life, this was also common among European lords in medieval times. Now was not the time for sightseeing, so he put his mind to it. At that moment, Cecil, the intelligence chief who had accompanied the army, roughly estimated the number of pirate prisoners and casualties and reported, "Sir, the pirates' fighting force has basically been wiped out here. Based on my estimation, they have no more than 50 men left." After a brief discussion among the officers, 2 cannons and a company were left to guard the city gate, while the other troops spread out in platoons to search for any remaining pirates, especially the pirate leader Shark. After a brief interrogation of the prisoners, this cunning pirate leader had incited his men to fight to the death before quietly slipping away himself. Schroeder suggested, "I think the dock area must be occupied immediately. Shark might have secretly escaped by ship from there." Paul agreed and ordered Schroeder to lead a company on a forced march to the dock area to blockade the port. The other officers also led their respective soldiers to search for the remaining pirates, while he himself, along with intelligence chief Cecil, led 2 platoons, including musketeers, towards the church in the town center. Intelligence indicated that this was the pirates' temporary headquarters, and Paul hoped they might have hidden something there, perhaps glittering gold coins or sparkling gems. In various legends, pirates were known for their penchant for hoarding treasure. Meanwhile, the residents of Franklin Harbor kept their doors tightly shut, fearing the impact of the battle. The streets were quiet, save for the sounds of marching troops and horses' hoofs. As the church approached, the lead soldier suddenly gave a warning signal, and a platoon of soldiers immediately surrounded the Earl and Cecil. The church doors were tightly shut, and 2 pirate-dressed corpses lay at the entrance. Strange indeed, they should have been the first unit to arrive in this area. Had the pirates fallen into infighting? Soon, the church doors were forced open, and the soldiers stormed into the hall, meticulously searching every corner. But apart from a few pirate corpses, they found nothing. It seems there really was infighting. The other group ran off with the valuables, Paul concluded. In his anxiety, he silently prayed, "Lord of Light, although I wasn't very respectful to your brothers on Earth in my past life, you must bless Schroeder so he can stop them. Afterwards, I'll offer you 3 sticks of incense. Oh no, I mean donate 3 gold, silver coins to the church. Never mind, copper coins will do." He reluctantly led 2 soldiers around the church, hoping the pirates would leave something behind. After personally inspecting several rooms, he came to a room on the 2nd floor. He glanced around and found nothing but a bed, a square table, and an old wardrobe. "Lord of Light, give me a miracle, or you won't get those 3 copper coins," he complained, kicking the wardrobe in frustration. "Ah!" A loud but clear exclamation rang out. The 2 soldiers and the count stared wide-eyed. "Who goes there? Come out," a soldier shouted as he kicked the wardrobe hard, while another quickly shielded the count behind him. A flurry of footsteps sounded outside the room. Soldiers from other areas had heard the commotion and were rushing towards the room. A voice, choked with sobs, came from inside the wardrobe. "Stop kicking. I'll come out. Please spare me, please spare me." Then the wardrobe door opened, and to everyone's surprise, a middle-aged man in a white robe with a receding hairline emerged. He staggered a few steps, then knelt down in front of Paul, grabbing his leg and weeping uncontrollably, pleading, "My lord, I'm just a traveling priest, staying here for a few days. I'm not with the pirates living here. Please don't kill an innocent man," he then wailed, his voice truly heartbreaking. Get up, Paul kicked him away. This was too much. He couldn't bear to see a greasy middle-aged man kneeling before him, sobbing uncontrollably. However, the Mediterranean priest had a keen eye. He recognized the boy as the leader of the group at a glance. The boy, however, ignored him and continued wailing, "Father in heaven, your servant is about to go and serve you." It seemed his domineering aura was truly formidable, Although he was trying to control it, even a slight leak was enough to knock an ordinary person down. The Count, with an air of arrogance, swept his hair back with his right hand, raised his chin, and struck what he thought was a very cool pose. I am the local lord, here to eradicate the long-standing pirates and protect the people, not to kill or burn. Hell, let him continue to be enveloped in his aura. Lord, the Mediterranean priest abruptly stopped wailing and looked up to carefully examine the man before him. He was so busy wailing that, upon closer inspection, this man's current actions and demeanor did indeed resemble that of a spoiled rich man's foolish son. Ahem, he stood up, cleared his throat to hide his embarrassment, and straightened his clothes. The Mediterranean priest said slowly and methodically, "So you are the lord of this place. May I ask how this young sir is addressed?" There was a hint of arrogance on his face, reminding Paul of the royal envoy he had tricked. Speaking of which, that guy disappeared after the pirate attack, and no one knew where he had gone. Standing before you is the lord of the northwest of the kingdom, the nemesis of pirates, the one who summons thunder, firearms, the spreader of the gospel of God, paper-making, the Earl of Arda, Paul Gleman. Should he add the title of liberator of the buttocks? But then he thought better of it. The Mediterranean priest's face immediately turned into a chrysanthemum. "So you are an earl?" He clasped his hands to his chest, interlaced his fingers, and looked at him as if he were an angel descended from heaven. The previous hint of arrogance had completely vanished, as if it had never existed. Paul sized up the man who claimed to be a priest, waved to the soldiers, and said, "You all go out first. I need to speak with this priest alone." Seeing the soldiers hesitate, he patted the musket tucked at his waist. "Don't worry, it's fine, thanks to Red Left-Handed Sword, Deceitful and Immoral, and Book Friend 20,170,192 for the recommendation votes." Chapter 31 The Down on His Luck Priest. The soldiers left, and Paul closed the door. The priest, suddenly flustered, broke out in a cold sweat. "Lord Gleman," he said, "though I know I am handsome and dashing, I have already dedicated everything to the Lord of Light." Paul stammered, "Oh, what did you say?" "Never mind, take off your clothes first." "Oh no, it looks like I'm doomed today." "Sigh, being too handsome is a sin. I've heard nobles and church leaders have a taste for it, but I never imagined such a young boy would be tainted by this vice. Lord of Light, forgive your servant," the priest silently prayed, then flopped onto the bed, turning to Paul with teary eyes. "Please be gentle, you fucking stand up right now," Paul roared, his face turning a deep purplish red. He finally realized what the guy was thinking, pulling out his musket to feed him peanuts. How could a straight man like me do something so despicable? Okay. Sorry, the priest felt like he'd been granted a pardon, at least he'd preserve his chastity. Barely managing to suppress the urge to shoot the man in front of him, Paul took a few deep breaths and gritted his teeth, saying, "Your clothes are torn. I see a very interesting tattoo on you." "Damn. How does he know this?" the priest thought to himself, realizing something was wrong. "Lord Gleman, you must be seeing things." No, I'm definitely not seeing things. And I've seen shark-shaped tattoos on members of the shark gang. But speaking of which, MR priest's tattoo placement is quite unique. Speak. Who exactly are you?" Paul pressed, pointing the dark muzzle of his gun at the middle-aged man who called himself priest. "I really am a priest from the church." The middle-aged man collapsed to the ground again, begging for mercy. The thing in the Count's hand was clearly deadly. Before he could be pressed further, the man spilled a whole bunch of information. According to his confession, his name was John Morrison, originally a priest at a village church in a nearby territory. The shark gang raided the area, robbing them and kidnapping him. He expected to be thrown into the sea to feed the fish, but the pirate leader, Shark, forced him to join the pirate crew. Although these pirates were ruthless and murderous, many, including their leader Shark, had significant spiritual needs, requiring a real clergyman to preside over their confessions and prayers. Thus, Father John Morrison shamelessly took on the prestigious and promising profession of piracy, even having a shark with sharp teeth tattooed on his body, the gang's symbol, and stayed with the pirate crew for a year. Paul wasn't surprised that pirates were religious. After all, there are some deeply sinful people on earth who like to burn incense and worship Buddha, and the more sins they commit, the more superstitious they become. But John Morrison still needed a thorough interrogation. He picked up a thick Bible lying next to the cabinet. This guy had probably been carrying this book around in the cabinet the whole time. "I'm asking you, What does page 132 of this book say? Suddenly, the world was as bright as day, and a majestic voice arose out of nowhere. Morrison actually recited it from memory, word for word. He was made to recite several other passages, which he also recited flawlessly. Not bad, You flatter me, sir. All right, I'll believe you as a priest for now. Morrison was overjoyed. Thank you, Lord Gleman. Could you send someone to take me back? Do you want to live or die? Paul once again pointed the dark muzzle of his gun at Morrison. Damn it. He had just escaped one trap only to fall into another. Father Morrison was on the verge of tears. Were all these lords now like bandits? Lord Gleman, how can you threaten a clergyman like this? Bang! With a loud crash, Morrison felt something fly past him. Instinctively, he turned around and saw a large hole in the wall. Then the door was kicked open, and a large group of soldiers rushed in, weapons pointed at Morrison. This was terrifying. Heavenly Father, please protect your believers. Morrison nodded frantically. I want to live. Of course I want to live. If that thing Paul was holding had been a fraction of course, his head would probably be cracked open. Very well. I hereby conscript you into my army in the name of Earl Paul Gleman, Lord of Arda. Oh, but Lord Gleman, I can't lift a finger. Oh, you don't want to? Fine, I won't kill you. I'll hand you over to the Northwest Bishop. Herr Hell, a clergyman who's spent a year in a pirate's den, with pirate tattoos on his body. I wonder what the bishop will decide. Serving you is my greatest honor. Morrison's face immediately contorted as if he'd received a divine decree. Don't worry, it's just to do some ideological work, to satisfy the soldiers' religious needs. You know, we can't carry churches around on campaigns, so your role as a military priest will come in handy. Morrison didn't hesitate. I obey your orders, Lord Gleman. Judging from his earlier demeanor, this young earl was no pushover. Paul said, however, when you're doing ideological work, there are some things you should say and some things you shouldn't say. He suddenly remembered a large group of soldiers who had just stormed into the room, and changed the subject. Never mind, I'll teach you slowly later. If you do well, I won't treat you unfairly, but if you do anything underhanded, don't expect me to keep your little secrets. Morrison raised his right hand, his face solemn. In this sacred place, I swear to my heavenly Father that I will serve in Lord Gleman's army and will be utterly loyal to Paul Gleman. If he tells me to go east, I will never go west. If he tells me to chase dogs, I will never chase chickens. And you know what? This guy actually looks quite convincing when he's serious. Believe you for a second. Paul inwardly grumbled, but still introduced him to the surrounding soldiers. This is a clergyman captured by pirates and imprisoned here. His original church was burned down by the pirates. Did everyone hear what he just said? From now on, he will be our war priest. Haha, that gunshot was just me joking with a priest. The soldiers replied, yes, Your Excellency. On June X, 1990, sacred calendar, I first met St. Paul. At that time, I was imprisoned by pirates in the Church of Port François. They forced me to serve their pirate gang, but I remained loyal to the Lord of Light and could not submit to evil forces. The pirates tortured and humiliated me in every way, but I knew this was God's test for me, and I persevered through sheer willpower. Just when I was on the verge of death, St. Paul led his army to rescue me. When I first saw him, a soft light shone on him, and a majestic voice resounded in my mind, follow him, assist him. I knew that was a divine revelation from the Lord of Light, and I joined his army without hesitation, assisting him in creating great achievements that we dared not even dream of at the time. Excerpt from the Memoirs of John Morrison, the 250th Pope of the Church of Light. That was a sinful day, the exact details of which are lost to history. But what is certain is that from that day on, the traitor Morrison sold his soul to the devil Gleman, becoming his pawn. Evil began to erode the Church of Light, and with corruption and depravity, it ultimately became a tool for the devil Gleman to manipulate people's hearts. Excerpt from a propaganda pamphlet of an underground sect that claims to be the Orthodox Church of Light. Thank you Seed 198,903 for the recommendation vote. Chapter 32 Adventure Team. Paul Gleman led Morrison into the room, asking, isn't there any treasure or anything like that here? I'm not sure. The Shark Gang's finances are very tightly controlled, only a few core members know about them. But about 2 hours ago, a group of people came and carried away some boxes of various sizes. Looks like they really did abscond with the money. Pray to the Lord of Light for them. But to have infighting at this critical juncture is truly reckless. Morrison was puzzled. Infighting? I've never seen pirates fight, Paul asked. Then what about these pirate corpses? Morrison looked blank. Wasn't it your men who did it, sir? I hid after hearing the noise. Paul panicked upon hearing this and immediately ordered the surrounding soldiers, be on guard. There might be others lying in ambush here. He then pulled out a powder canister to load ammunition into his pistol. The soldiers, on high alert, escorted the Earl to the first-floor lobby. At that moment, a soldier ran out from the side corridor, stood before Paul, and reported, "Report. Commander Cecil discovered a basement with some suspicious individuals inside. They've all been disarmed. But they claim they're not pirates, and he's asking for your instructions." "Oh? So there really are other people in this church? Come on, take me there. How many times have I told you? We're not pirates. Have you ever seen a naturally beautiful young pirate like me?" Meruheimer, the leader of the Lichman Adventurers Guild, protested loudly, her brows furrowed. With her hands bound, this was the only way she could vent her frustration. However, no matter how much she protested, the gloomy-faced man ignored her, simply standing opposite her with his arms crossed. "Let him go or not, kill him or not, what do you want?" Meru shouted again, but again, there was no response. The green-haired girl in the scholar's cap advised, "Meru, don't shout any more. He's probably waiting for his superior to deal with us." Sigh, this time we've really been caught off guard. Dean sighed inwardly. The plan initially went smoothly. After two strange, loud noises outside the city, most of the pirates remaining at the church were redeployed. They lay in ambush near the church and waited quietly for a while. Luckily, a group of pirates, who were already few in number, managed to carry several large boxes onto a wagon and head towards the docks. They deduced that the pirates were about to give up and were trying to escape. They couldn't wait any longer. They had to seize the opportunity, lest the pirates move the hostages as well. The adventurers used their skills to launch a surprise attack on the church. A few pirates remained inside, presumably checking for any important items they might have missed. However, they were weaklings and no match for the plan, easily dispatched. After the battle, they thoroughly searched the church and found the entrance to a basement at the end of a corridor. Inside, they found only Susan's grandfather, the mayor, who was unconscious from the ordeal. Their initial target, young master born of the Horn Bay Alliance, was not there. Guild leader Meruheimer decisively ordered the green-haired girl, Laddie, to help Susan's grandfather return first, while the rest of the group pursued the pirates. However, just as they were preparing to return to the surface, they heard rapid footsteps from above and had to retreat to the basement. Intelligence Chief Cecil led his soldiers into the basement, discovered people inside, and immediately ordered the pirates to surrender, declaring that Lord Alda's army had arrived and that resistance would be futile. The adventurers then realized that the forces attacking Fland Harbor were the local lord's army and hastily explained that they were not pirates but adventurers there to rescue kidnapped hostages. The naturally suspicious intelligence chief couldn't easily believe them and insisted the adventurers lay down their weapons. The captain, Meruheimer, was also impatient, and the two quickly clashed. Just as the tension was about to escalate, the usually calm Dean and Laddie persuaded their captain. The group surrendered their weapons, Cecil ordered their hands bound, and then sent someone to consult Paul. Time ticked by, and after what felt like an eternity to the adventurers, someone finally entered the basement down the stairs. A boy, the group was puzzled upon seeing the newcomer. Paul asked, "These are the suspicious individuals you apprehended, a pink-haired, flat-chested girl, a blue-haired, pale-faced man, a blonde, flamboyant young man, and a green-haired girl wearing a scholar's hat." Their faces were obscured by the hat and the dim lighting. Cecil respectfully replied, "Yes, sir. They claim to be adventurers from the south, here to rescue hostages kidnapped by pirates, but I think it's best to be cautious." Paul nodded. You're absolutely right." He turned to the adventurers. "Tell me, how do you prove your identities?" The members of the Lichman adventurers were surprised. Judging from the boy's voice, he was clearly still going through puberty, meaning he was only about 15 years old. For a lord, that was far too young. In a desperate attempt to save lives, Meru said, "You're the lord of this place? We really are here to rescue people, please release us." Dean, on the verge of tears, quickly whispered in Meru's ear, "Captain, we're like meat on someone's chopping block now. You should at least use a respectful title. The other side is a fief noble like greedy Wolf Giles. He's the ruler of his own territory, not like the easygoing nobles in our land. I've heard these northern lords are tyrannical and domineering. If we offend him, He can easily find an excuse to kill us. Who can we complain to then? Seeing their whispering, Paul became alert. What are you doing? I warn you, no collusion. Just as Dean was about to speak up, his silent companion, Dilla, suddenly said, Your Excellency, I believe you should first consider the safety of your people. The old man beside us, tortured unconscious by the pirates, is the local mayor. Please lend a hand. His family can vouch for our identities. Paul looked at the green-haired girl who had spoken, and she stared back at him, revealing her face. She was dressed in the attire of a traveling scholar, completely covered from head to toe, and her face, framed by the high collar, displayed a charm far beyond that of ordinary women. Her eyes held crimson pupils, an unusual trait even in this world. Just as Paul's gaze met hers, he suddenly felt a barely perceptible glint in the girl's pupils. Was it his imagination? A slight dizziness washed over him, and he shook his head to dispel it, thinking to himself, sigh, I was too excited about the siege the next day and didn't sleep a wink last night. I'm exhausted now, I need to catch up on my sleep. He suppressed the urge to yawn and said, Well, you have a point. Cecil, do you know the mayor of Franklinport? Cecil looked troubled. I'm sorry, sir, I know the mayor is an old man, but I don't really know what he looks like. Go find a healer to treat this old man, and while you're at it, find some townspeople to confirm his identity. Steward Ford, who was in charge of the territory's administration, might know the local mayor, but he hadn't come with the army. Yes, sir, Cecil responded and ordered 2 soldiers to carry the old man out. Paul turned to the members of the adventurers group. As for you, you can only leave after the old man wakes up and proves your innocence. He wouldn't believe a single person's story just because there were beautiful women inside. Dean said, My lord, the mayor was already unconscious when we arrived, and he doesn't recognize us. But you can have his granddaughter, Susan, testify for us. He then gave Susan's address. Paul agreed, I'll bring her here immediately. I hope you are truly innocent. No one noticed that the green-haired girl beside him quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Chapter 33 Shark Caught in the Net 1. White waves gently lapped at the beach, and the cries of seagulls echoed through the air. Under the sunlight, the sea resembled a vast blue mirror, reflecting the azure sky and white waters. It should have been a perfect day for sailing, but the port area of Franklin was unusually quiet. The fishermen and merchants who usually fished and transported goods were nowhere to be seen, as no one wanted to get involved in trouble. Row faster. Not far from the shore, a dozen pirates were rowing with all their might, including their leader, Shark. They had abandoned the brothers who were still guarding the city gates, quietly returned to the church, gathered the gold and silver they had collected, and secretly transported it to the dock area. They found a galley and prepared to slip away unnoticed. Just as they were untying the mooring lines, Schroeder led his soldiers in a surprise attack on the dock area. The pirates were terrified. Forget about their waiting brothers, they cut the mooring lines, raised the sails, and began their escape. Schroeder ordered a pursuit, personally leading his soldiers onto 2 ships still anchored at the dock, and gave chase to the pirates. Although the sea was calm, Shark felt like he was in a storm. He cursed incessantly, from Gleman to the lackeys beside him who weren't rowing hard, in his eyes. However, the ships piloted by the soldiers were getting closer and closer. The pirates didn't have enough men, only about 20, and the gold and jewels they carried were too heavy. Getting Shark to abandon the treasure was practically impossible. I think you'd better surrender obediently. I can plead with a local lord to spare your lives, a weak voice rang out. The voice belonged to a young man with his hands bound behind his back. Shut up, Shark pounced and slapped the young man hard across the face. You better behave yourself, or I'll cut off your hand and feed it to the fish. The young man fell silent after the slap. This southern pretty boy named Quiller Foster arrived here 3 months ago, brazenly declaring he was coming to challenge the great pirate Howard. Good heavens, doesn't he know that those who did this before were thrown overboard to feed the sharks? But the wealthy South has never lacked such adventurous fools, especially these pampered young masters who, having had their fill of fine wine and women, crave something different. Well, you're lucky Edward wasn't around, so you weren't fed to real sharks, but this shark will certainly give you a good beating in his place. Judging by the pretty boy's attire, he's definitely wealthy. A few moves later, I'd uncover his background. He's from the Foster family of the Corner Bay Alliance, a prominent family in the Corner Bay area. In that case, let the pretty boy ride or let her home, obediently paying ransom. Even if the Corner Bay Alliance's navy is powerful, They can't possibly send a fleet over 2,000 nautical miles to the Northwest Bay to rescue a spoiled brat. With a large fortune about to be deposited, and the possibility of seizing Fland Harbor and establishing a fait accompli, perhaps even securing a noble title by paying off the surrounding lords, all that bright future had been ruined by that young man from the Griles family. HMPH. After I get the foster family's money, I'll recruit soldiers and horses, and sooner or later I'll make that kid meet his father. Two galleys maneuvered by Arda soldiers followed the pirate ship from the left and right. From the air, the distance between them was visibly decreasing. It was only a matter of time before the pirates were overtaken. Prepare for hand-to-hand combat. Shark drew his sword and ordered his men. I've been sailing the seas for over 20 years, I've seen it all, I refuse to believe I'll fall here today, the other pirates responded, drawing their weapons. Makarov shouted, we're about to ram the pirate ship. Are the muskets ready? His comrades replied that they were ready. Don't worry, we'll make sure they get what's coming to them. Alright, I'll count to 3, everyone give it your all. Alright, this volley should take down most of them, make sure you aim carefully, don't hurt our own men on the other ship, Lord Schroeder is on it too, at this close range, no problem at all. With 2 consecutive massive jolts, the 2 ships rammed into the pirate ship from the left and right. Both sides were shaken violently, and after things stabilized slightly, the muskets of the Alda army crackled and popped, killing 3 pirates instantly. Naval combat is somewhat turbulent, and despite the close distance, the musketeers didn't hide all their targets, but this was already a preemptive strike, and the pirates' morale was clearly suppressed. Kill! Schroeder jumped onto the pirate ship first, Shark wielding his weapon to block the old knight's sword, a heavy-looking broadsword that made Schroeder's knight's sword appear rather slender in comparison. The shark, its eyes bloodshot and veins bulging on its neck, roared, old man, come on. Come on. I've drunk the blood of countless men with this one, and today it's going to taste something new, HMPH. Bluffing, the battle-hardened Schroeder could tell at a glance that the man was just trying to bolster his courage. Without further ado, the two began fighting on the deck. The old knight, somewhat unaccustomed to fighting on the rocking ship, initially only parried the shark's attacks, but his defense was impenetrable, and the shark gained no advantage. The others also found their opponents, and the sounds of clashing weapons and the fighting echoed across the sea. You bandits! Don't even think about taking my money. The shark swung its weapon wildly, its moves wide and sweeping, so excited that it almost lost track of its opponents. However, the Arda army, outnumbering the pirates many times over, ultimately crushed the pirates' desperate resistance. Schroeder gradually adapted to the battle, shifting from defense to offense. Finally, Shark was stabbed in the thigh by Schroeder's sword and collapsed on the deck, too weak to stand. I surrender. I surrender. He threw down his weapon in despair, resigning himself to fate. Seeing their leader surrender, the other pirates who had not yet been killed also threw down their weapons and surrendered. Tie them up and head back. Schroeder glanced coldly at Shark, who lay slumped on the deck, and gave the order to return to the dock. At this moment, a voice rang out from a corner of the deck. You are Lord Alda's army, aren't you? My lord, save me. The voice was filled with the joy of surviving a close call. Schroeder turned his head and saw a young man with his hands tied behind his back, tears welling up in his eyes, crouching in a corner of the deck. The battle had been too intense, and he hadn't noticed him for a moment. He couldn't be careless, he had to find out his identity first. Who are you? Why are you tied to the ship by pirates? I am from the foster family of the Southern Corner Alliance. I was kidnapped by pirates a few months ago. If you save me, my family will reward you handsomely. The young man hurriedly revealed his identity. Chapter 34 Shark caught in the net 2. As Schroeder escorted the shark gang back to the docks, Paul Gleman was verifying the identities of the Lichman adventurers group. Several local residents of Fland Harbor were summoned, including Susan, the mayor's granddaughter. So, this dying old man is indeed the mayor of this town? Yes, sir, the townspeople answered cautiously, barely daring to meet the Lord's gaze. Their eyes fell on Susan, who was sobbing softly beside the mayor. Poor thing, orphaned at a young age, she relied on her grandfather. If the old man didn't make it through this, what would become of her? Paul looked at Susan. Young lady, were those people claiming to be adventurers indeed the ones you invited to rescue your grandfather? Susan glanced up at the Lord, then looked down at her grandfather again, coldly replying, Yes, sir. Strange, does this young girl have a grudge against me? Paul was very puzzled. He had seen Susan's glance earlier, a look of hatred and disgust, and coupled with her tone of voice, anyone would feel uncomfortable being treated like that for no reason. Your name is Susan, right? I sympathize with your grandfather's plight. Is there anything I can do to help you? This time, Susan didn't even look up, coldly replying, nothing is needed, sir. Just fulfill your lord's duty as a lord, and don't cower in the castle when the pirates come to bully us again. Victor, recently promoted to captain of the internal guard, was standing beside Paul. Hearing Susan's retort to his lord, he drew his sword and shouted, insolence. The other townspeople were terrified and immediately knelt down, pleading, Lord, Susan is too young to understand, and her grandfather has been beaten so badly, she's deeply saddened. Please have mercy. Unexpectedly, the little girl was provoked by Victor's insolence, turning around abruptly and shouting at Paul in a high-pitched, tearful voice, my grandfather has been tortured like this, and you only just arrived? Do you know how many people have had their life savings stolen, how many women have been violated, and how many who dared to resist have been killed? Do you nobles know this? All you do is hide in your high castles, drinking and making merry. Have you ever cared about the lives of your people? If it weren't for the pirates wanting to occupy this place permanently, would you even be here? After venting her anger, the girl burst into tears. Several townspeople dared not plead for her anymore, collapsing to the ground, trembling all over, fearing that the Lord's wrath would implicate them. Victor looked at the Earl, awaiting his order. If the Earl was willing, this girl was doomed. A commoner insulting a noble was a grave crime, even though he himself felt great sympathy for her. Paul waved his hand, ordering Victor to put away his weapons. He walked to Susan's side, reaching out to put his hand on the girl's shoulder, but then slowly lowered his arm halfway down. He said, I understand how you feel. A few months ago, my father also died at the hands of pirates, the Shark Gang, who were based in Franklin Harbor. The sorrow in his words was obvious. The girl's body stiffened slightly, and she stopped crying. The other townspeople understood. They had been wondering why their lord had turned into a teenager. It turned out that their old lord had been killed by pirates. The Shark Gang wasn't foolish enough to publicize the killing of a nobleman. So almost none of the residents of Franklin Harbor knew about it. The lord continued, as for why it took so long to deal with the pirates, it's not something that can be explained in a few words. My forces were too weak before. I had to accumulate strength and wait for the right opportunity. In short, I'm sorry. Silence fell. Everyone in the hall, soldiers and civilians alike, was stunned by this I'm sorry, a nobleman apologizing to a commoner. It was unheard of. The little girl, Susan, turned to look at Paul, her round eyes wide. She had thought she was going to die after her desperate act, but fate had given her this unexpected turn of events, and it turned out that her family had also been killed by pirates. The boy, not much older than himself, spoke with a firmer tone. However, I swear I will fulfill your request to stop hiding in the castle, not just pirates. No one will be allowed to bully my people, Paul silently added in his mind. The members of the Lichman adventurer group, temporarily imprisoned in the basement, were released. The blue-haired handsome Dean and the blonde, Puck-like Kai both looked relieved and thanked Paul profusely. Mayra rubbed her wrists, which ached from the ropes, and complained inwardly, those two men were one thing, but we two ladies were treated so rudely. These northerners are so barbaric. According to the inquiry, the Lichman adventurer group was not from the kingdom of Lalman, but from the independent southern territory of Messiah. No wonder these people didn't look at her with the same reverence as the others. In some commercially developed city-states and independent territories in the south, the divide between nobles and commoners wasn't as large as in the northern countries, though this was only relative. He didn't intend to make things difficult for these people. Arbitrarily punishing citizens of another country might cause diplomatic trouble, and it wouldn't be good to make enemies for no reason. Just then, a soldier came in to report, Your Excellency, Shark has been captured by Major Scrutter and is already at the church entrance. Oh? Quickly, invite the old knight in and bring the prisoners up as well. Soon, Scrutter and his men escorted Shark and his gang into the church. Your Excellency, the bandit leader Shark and his accomplices have been captured. These pirates indeed abandoned their companions, attempting to escape secretly by sea. The old knight, with a look of disdain, briefly described the battle. Shark and his henchmen were bound hand and foot, and Shark, wounded on the leg, lay on the ground groaning. That's him, sir. He's the pirate leader Shark. Lord, you must kill him and avenge us. The townspeople in the hall pointed him out. Shark suddenly perked up and shouted, "Lord Griles, I know the location of Edward's secret treasure. If you don't kill me, I'll tell you. Your father's death was my fault. If you spare my life, I'll be your dog, biting whoever you tell me to bite, HMPH. Even on the verge of death, he's still grasping at a last straw. Leaving aside the fact that Shark is his father's killer, if he spares him for money, how can he face the world? This treasure is most likely a fabrication. Would Edward's treasure be known to a small, subservient group like Shark? Even if Shark knew, why doesn't he go get it himself? Why is he fighting this battle with Griles' army? Paul ordered, "Lock these bastards in the basement. I'm holding a public trial tomorrow." He didn't want to believe a single word his pirate leader said. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35 Aftermath. After the group of pirate captives were taken to the basement, Paul noticed a stranger standing next to Schroeder. Although his face was unshaven and his clothes were tattered, it was clear at a glance that they were not clothes that ordinary commoners could afford. He asked, "Schroeder, who is this?" "Oh, I forgot to mention. He claims to be from the foster family of the Southern Corner Alliance. He came to explore the Northwest Bay a few months ago and was unfortunately kidnapped by pirates." The young man immediately stepped forward and gave a perfectly executed aristocratic bow. "Your Excellency, you must be the lord of this place. Please allow me to introduce myself. My father is Marcus Foster, a member of the Bayhorn Alliance Council. I am his second son, Queller Foster. On behalf of the Foster family, I extend my highest respect to you and thank you for rescuing me from the pirates." Hearing the young man's introduction, he barely managed to suppress a laugh and replied, "You're too kind. It's my duty as a lord." This Marcus Foster certainly knows how to name people. Since he's a big shot on the Bayhorn Alliance Council, he must be involved in trade, yet he named his son Los, even though he knew it was just a coincidence that the pronunciation was the same as in Chinese. He couldn't help but inwardly scoff. "You are Queller Foster." After the young man introduced himself, the members of the Lichman Adventurers Guild all turned to look at him. "That's me." The young man stroked his hair, speaking with a touch of narcissism. These guys were clearly commoners. There was no need to be as polite to them as he had to the Count. Guild leader Mayruheimer roared in fury. Do you know how much trouble we went through to find you?" Queller Foster looked utterly bewildered, his face full of question marks. How many of you are there? I can't take it anymore. What a capricious young master. Your family hasn't heard from you for 2 months, they're practically frantic with worry. The Marcus commissioned our Adventurers Guild to find you, and after we got here, we found out you were trapped in a pirate's den. We almost lost our lives trying to save you. I was too impulsive, I made my family worry. Hey. The key point I made was the last sentence. Huh? What did you say? I'm furious. I don't care. When we were commissioned, we only said we were looking for someone, not that we had to fight pirates. The commission must be doubled. No, it should be 3 times the original. Queller Foster snapped his fingers, closed his eyes, and said, "Hell, no problem. I've always respected adventurers. The Foster family will certainly grant your wish." Their attitude was as indifferent as could be. You didn't even ask what the initial commission was. A wave of envy and resentment towards the tycoon surged through everyone in the hall, including Paul. As they spoke, the officers who had been tasked with eliminating the remaining pirates in Franklin Harbor arrived at the church. Queller Foster and the Lichman Adventurers group were then allowed to rest, and the townspeople were sent home. In a room next to the hall, officers of battalion and company ranks were summoned for a meeting. Staff Officer Joyce, who had compiled the results of the battle, stood up and reported, "Gentlemen, the battle was a resounding success. The Shark Gang pirate group was wiped out. A total of 123 pirates were killed, and all the others, including their leader Shark, were captured. Our side suffered 32 casualties and 55 wounded to varying degrees." The officers exchanged glances, very satisfied with the outcome. Paul asked, "Any news on that pirate gang led by the one nicknamed Loach?" Joyce replied, "We didn't encounter any of them in this battle. According to the prisoners, they seem to have fled back to sea early on." Schroeder added, "During the chase of the sharks, we also recovered several chests of coins they had loaded onto the ship. A rough estimate is 2,000 gold coins. 6,000 silver coins, and tens of thousands of copper coins. Wow, everyone exclaimed in surprise, not expecting piracy to be so lucrative. A small pirate gang had plundered so much wealth. Paul was overjoyed. With so much money, he could finally do things he'd always wanted to do. We can use this money to forge more cannons, recruit more soldiers, build more muskets, and establish our own naval power. The officers offered their opinions on how to use the money, and even Cecil kept giving him meaningful glances, hinting that his intelligence work also needed more funding. But much of this money was stolen from the coastal inhabitants. Shouldn't it be returned to them? Someone suddenly asked. The room fell silent. The heated discussion abruptly stopped, and everyone exchanged glances before turning to the Earl. Damn it! Why are you all looking at me? Why are you all looking at me? Of course, I want to return it to the people, but I don't know if you all want to. If you also want to return it, then everyone is happy. But if you don't want to return it, wouldn't my words go against everyone's wishes? Would you throw me out the window? The Earl was torn. Oh dear. This is so frustrating. Who'll step forward and say something? After nearly a minute of this stalemate, the old knight Schroeder finally stepped forward. With their current methods, it's difficult to accurately assess the losses of each household. Besides, the shark gang has been operating at sea for years, and some of their money was stolen from other territories. If we let the people claim their losses, it will give many cunning individuals an opportunity to take advantage of the chaos. For example, someone who wasn't robbed might insist that pirates stole their only silver coin. What should we do then? Everyone realized their mistake. The old knight was right. They might end up with very little money, or even have to pay out of pocket. Cecil immediately said, yes, the common people are the worst. They're cunning and greedy. When I was in charge of forestry, my biggest headache was dealing with those cunning people who were always looking for petty gains. Unexpectedly, the young count flew into rage upon hearing this. He slammed his fist on the table, glaring fiercely at the intelligence chief, who immediately covered his mouth, still unaware of what he had said wrong. Schroeder continued, therefore, I suggest compensating the victims through other means. For example, reducing some taxes, building bridges and roads for the robbed villages, or sending undercover agents to provide only monetary compensation to families whose livelihoods have been truly threatened, under other pretexts, of course. This is better than simply having people come forward to claim the property based on hearsay. A good idea. Lord Schroeder has such foresight. I second that. Everyone agreed with Schroeder's suggestion. Paul also deeply agreed, and seeing everyone's agreement, he made the final decision. All right. It's settled then. Last night I read through the chapters I posted before, and I felt the writing was a bit poor, with quite a few typos. I'll go back and try to fix it today. Also, I feel that calling the protagonist by his first name, Paul, sounds better than calling him by his last name, Gleman, and I will change that as well. Chapter 36 In the Name of the People. The day after recapturing Franklin Harbor, Paul Gleman ordered the townspeople to gather in the square in front of the church for a public trial of the pirates. Soldiers began going door to door to inform the villagers shortly after dawn, and by 9 o'clock in the morning, the entire town had assembled in the square. People noticed 4 gallows standing menacingly in the square, and began speculating about how many pirates their lord would hang. Over 200 captured shark gang pirates were bound and kneeling before the church steps. Seeing these villains who had terrorized Franklin Harbor for months, the townspeople were filled with righteous indignation. Now, these pirates were like stray dogs, no longer a threat. People threw fish and shrimp at them, some even hurling stones, leaving many unfortunate captives bleeding from the head. Many attempted to break through the cordon and attack the captives with their fists and feet, but were immediately driven back by soldiers brandishing their weapons. If it weren't for the soldiers on guard, the pirates would probably have been beaten to death by the angry mob. They stole my family's life-saving money, my daughter was violated by these bastards, sob sob, Lord of Light, send these devils to hell. Such complaints and curses rose and fell, the square a chaotic mess. Paul stared blankly at everything happening below from the second-floor balcony. He suddenly asked, "Did you see that, Schroeder?" The person behind him immediately replied, "Yes, Your Excellency." It seems the townspeople hate the pirates to the core. Paul continued, "I suddenly wondered, if I had lost yesterday's battle, if I were the prisoner bound below now, how would these townspeople treat me?" Schroeder fell silent. He didn't know how to answer. Paul stammered, "I guess they were no different from those pirates." They'll throw rotten fish and stones at my head anyway. How could that be? Earl, you're their lord, Schroeder comforted him, though his lack of confidence was easily detected. Paul scoffed. Yes, this lord's family has abandoned them to pirates for over 20 years, and now they shamelessly come to collect taxes. The old knight didn't know how to respond and could only remain silent. Did you see the way those townspeople looked at me yesterday? I could tell. It wasn't much different from how they looked at Shark later. The only difference was that my club was heavier, and I knocked Shark down, so they showed me a little more superficial respect. If Shark had knocked me down, it would have just been a change of lord to them. It would have been the same old tyranny, the same exploitation and extortion. The young count sighed softly. Winning back the people's hearts is a long and arduous task. Let's use these pirates to vent our anger for now. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the public trial began. Captain Holman, with his loud voice, was chosen to read out the pirates' crimes. The captain unfurled the scroll and began to read aloud. June of the Holy Calendar 1990. In the name of Earl Paul Gleman, Lord of Arda, a public trial is hereby convened to announce the heinous crimes of the Shark Gang pirate group, summarized after discussion as follows: plundering and amassing countless riches, raping women without shame, slaughtering the innocent with cruelty and inhumanity, obstructing trade routes with insatiable greed, violently resisting the law, showing no remorse. One charge after another was read aloud, and the pirates below the steps turned ashen-faced. Kill them! Kill them! The townspeople's shouts converged into waves, repeatedly impacting the hearts of these guilty men. After the charges were announced, the pirates' sentences were to be handed down. Based on yesterday's discussion, Shark was doomed. Killing the old lord alone was enough to warrant several deaths. Even if Paul didn't sentence him to death, the other high-ranking officials in the territory wouldn't let him off the hook. Other leaders, both big and small, weren't spared either. Anyone who rose to the rank of leader in the Shark Gang was ruthless and cruel, their hands stained with the blood of countless people. As for the lower-ranking henchmen, a perfunctory screening was necessary. Those who had murdered or raped women were executed, those who committed other crimes were sentenced to hard labor. The screening was left to the common people. Thus, any town resident who claimed to have been abused by pirates could enter the cordon and line up to identify the individual crimes committed by the henchmen. A townsman dragged a pirate from the pile of prisoners. It's him. I saw him try to leave without paying for his meal that day. Poor old Glenn chased after him, and this bastard stabbed him in the stomach. An old woman kept scratching at the beast who had raped her daughter. My daughter was violated by this villain. You must do justice for my daughter. Similar scenes continued to unfold until 3 p.m., when all the identifications were completed. The pirates who had committed heinous crimes were dragged out. Knowing their deaths were imminent, they closed their eyes and awaited their final judgment. Paul stood on the balcony and shouted to the crowd below, "Citizens of Fland Harbor, I, Lord Paul Gleman of Arda, hereby announce the verdict on the pirates. As for the remaining less guilty, they are sentenced to 3 to 5 years of hard labor." He slowly turned his gaze to the serious criminals being escorted, and solemnly declared, "For these heinous criminals who have been accused, only the death penalty can appease your anger, so I sentence them to hanging. In the name of the people, execute them immediately." The soldiers immediately led the serious criminals to the gallows. They placed the noose around the prisoners' necks, kicked away the stools beneath their feet, and after a futile struggle, the prisoners lost their lives. Then came the second batch, the third batch. With each departing sinful soul, cheers erupted from the crowd. After the execution, Paul shouted to the crowd again, "People of Arda, to offset the losses caused by pirate raids, I declare a 1-year tax exemption for the coastal areas of Arda." Wow, the townspeople exclaimed in surprise. This was indeed tremendous news. Before their astonishment subsided, they heard the Lord shout again, "Under God's witness, I, Paul Gleman, hereby swear that from this day forward." Paul hesitated, and someone gently nudged his waist from behind. "No matter who the enemy is, no matter how powerful the enemy is, whether they come from the sea or the land, I will never abandon you. I will always share your glory and your shame. I will make your safety my safety, and your happiness my happiness. I will dedicate my life to defending your safety and happiness." The people of Port Franklin were moved. They were truly moved. After all, people in this era were still relatively simple and honest. They all recalled the saga of noblemen, virtuous and just, told by bards. These nobles were portrayed as just, compassionate, and loving towards their people, former tales they'd always dismissed as jokes. But now, a living example stood before them. Paul turned and quietly complained to Cecil, "Damn it, which third-rate poet's manuscript did you copy this from? It's so damn cheesy." "I'm getting goosebumps," Cecil chuckled. "Sir, that's the effect we wanted. The more cheesy, the more emotional. Our people here love that." Father Merson, hiding in a corner, watched the entire public trial. He silently clasped his hands to his chest and whispered a prayer. "Almighty and all-knowing Lord, may your radiance forever shine upon Lord Paul Gleman." With the conclusion of the public trial, the months-long pirate turmoil on the territory of Arda, which had begun in the spring, finally came to an end. I spent a whole day correcting typos and punctuation errors in the previous chapters. I didn't expect there to be so many. I sincerely apologize. Also, I changed the protagonist's everyday address from his surname to his first name. It sounds a bit better now. Thanks again to Seed 198,903, and others for the recommendation votes. Chapter 37 Inspection of the Shipyard. After the public trial, Paul Gleman did not immediately return to Lakeside. Many matters still needed to be addressed, so he decided to stay in Port Franklin for a few more days. For example, administratively, the former mayor was clearly no longer fit to serve due to health reasons. Traditionally, a gathering of respected local figures would be held to elect a new mayor, a common practice in the Northern Territories. Lords, as long as they could collect sufficient taxes and conscript enough laborers and soldiers, were quite willing to delegate what they considered minor powers to the local authorities. Conversely, they could use this as an excuse to evade some of their responsibilities and obligations if problems arose locally. However, Paul did not intend to continue this tradition. He wanted to appoint a candidate himself, firmly holding the power to appoint and dismiss officials within his territory. This would ensure his will was effectively implemented, paving the way for the envisioned series of reforms. Of course, given the former mayor's extensive experience, Paul reserved an advisory position for him, with his salary paid and included in the Lord's budget. So he wrote to Chief Steward Ford, requesting that he immediately send 2 experienced and trustworthy men to Franklin Port to serve as mayor and deputy mayor. To his surprise and delight, Franklin Port actually had a small shipyard, and it was even his family's property. Upon learning of the shipyard's existence, he immediately led Schroeder, Bryce, and a group of officers to visit it. After the public trial, the shipyard resumed work. Paul and his men stood near the dock, watching the craftsmen at work from a distance, while the shipyard manager cautiously accompanied these bigwigs. "Do we only build this type of ship here?" Paul asked, frowning. In his view, the ships in the dock and shipyard were somewhat similar to the Viking longships of medieval Norway, with a single mast, a single mainsail, and a stiff sail at that, with wind power only playing a supporting role, and most of the power coming from the oarsmen on board. Shipyard manager Reuben respectfully replied, "Yes, sir, our shipyard currently only builds this type of ship." The young count seemed somewhat dissatisfied. Paul was indeed not satisfied. In his mind, even if they couldn't build steam-powered ironclads right now, they should at least be able to build sailing battleships like the HMS Victory of the British Royal Navy. These single-masted or powered ships looked like toys to him. He shook his head and said, "That won't do. The Navy we're building can't go to sea in these kinds of ships." The group of landlubbers around him were puzzled. "Your Excellency, aren't all ships like this? We need warships with larger hulls and more sails, with greater endurance, capable of crossing oceans, not ships that have to return to port for resupply after less than a week at sea." He turned to ask Reuben, the shipyard manager, "Are similar ships used all over the world?" Reuben thought for a moment and replied, "I can't say all over the world, but as far as I know, they're basically like this. There might be differences in details, but the structure is similar. Some large ships have 2 or 3 masts. Do they all use these rigid sails? Some use soft sails. For example, they're very popular in the Cape Bay area. What are the advantages and disadvantages of these 2 types of sails? Generally speaking, rigid sails require fewer operators, can handle winds from all directions, and are adaptable to changing wind directions and complex sea areas. However, they don't utilize tailwinds well, resulting in slower speeds and making them unsuitable for long-distance voyages. Flexible sails, on the other hand, are lighter, allowing for taller masts and increased wind-receiving surface area, making them suitable for long-distance voyages. However, they are more complex to operate, and furling them is both cumbersome and dangerous, requiring a higher level of skill from the sailors. Reuben paused, then continued, "Maritime transport in our northwest coastal region isn't very frequent, and we generally sail along the coastline, allowing for easy resupply ashore. Therefore, the more convenient rigid sails are popular. Southern countries, like the Cape Cove Alliance, have more developed maritime trade and more advanced shipbuilding technology, so they generally use flexible sails and have larger ships. The Cape Cove Alliance. I see. Paul thought of the unfortunate young master captured by pirates. Wasn't he a member of the Cape Cove Alliance? Reuben suddenly remembered something and apologized. My lord, please wait a moment. He then hurriedly ran back to his office and rushed back, a thick book tucked under his arm. He handed the book to him with both hands. This is information I've compiled on various types of ships since I entered the industry. Since your excellency is so interested in ships, perhaps you'll find it helpful. Paul took it and flipped through a few pages. It was richly illustrated, recording every type of ship the shipyard manager had learned about since entering the industry. The information was abundant, including deadweight tonnage, draft, crew configuration and number, range, materials, and so on. Incredible, he exclaimed sincerely. Reuben was truly a talent. Receiving the Lord's praise, Reuben was a little shy. You flatter me, my lord. Paul immediately announced a reward of 10 silver coins for him. Reuben could hardly believe his ears. His little hobby had actually made him a small fortune. What's the largest ship you've ever built here? The largest we've built was nearly 30 meters long, with a deadweight tonnage of 70 tons. How long does it take to build a ship? Different ships require different construction periods. Assuming the main materials are readily available, small ships can be finished within a month if rushed. Large ships, if urgently needed, can be completed within a quarter. But for those large, sturdy, and durable ships with particularly high-quality requirements, after the keel and ribs are built, they need to be air-dried on the slipway for a year before the hull and interior can be laid. Subsequent construction can only proceed slowly and methodically, which takes much longer. How many years have you worked at this shipyard? I've been helping my father here since I was a child, almost 20 years now. This place is always visited by pirates, right? Don't they cause you any trouble? Pirates also need to build and repair ships, so they haven't caused us much trouble. In fact, they'll give us some money, since we still need to buy shipbuilding materials, tools, etc. Sometimes they'll deliver ready-made items. As for how they get them, you know. Watching Paul and Reuben's exchange, everyone murmured to themselves, it seems the Earl is determined to develop the Navy. Reuben is going to be put to great use. After touring the shipyard, Paul bid farewell to Reuben and prepared to lead everyone back to their temporary base at the town's central church. Before leaving, he patted Reuben on the shoulder and encouraged him, work hard, this shipyard will be very useful to me. Although such a gesture from a young boy to a middle-aged man might seem somewhat comical to onlookers, it still moved the shipyard manager to tears, who swore on his chest that he would never disappoint the Earl's expectations. Finally, Paul instructed Reuben to use the weight of the seawater displaced after the ship was launched to measure its size. He still preferred the concept of displacement, but how to calculate it was up to the shipyard manager. Chapter 38 Naval Discussion 1. Paul Gleman and his entourage rode along the Mosque Road, the townspeople bowing to them. After the declaration at the public trial, the residents of Fland Harbor finally showed some genuine respect for their lord. The streets were bustling with activity. Without the pirates, merchants no longer needed to hide at home. They set up stalls on both sides of the road, loudly hawking their goods. Children played and frolicked, men hurried about their work, and women gathered in small groups, discussing everyday matters or browsing the various stalls. The whole town was thriving. Paul, observing all this, suddenly said, "We need to recruit sailors for the future Navy." Bryce, upon hearing this, said with difficulty, "There are quite a few people familiar with the water, but those skilled in naval combat are few and far between. Time waits for no one, gentlemen. There are still many pirates at sea, constantly threatening Arda. Small groups of pirates are manageable, but what if a large pirate crew comes? Even if they can't defeat us on land, what if they just come ashore, rob us, and leave? I can't possibly station a soldier every few meters along the coast. So we must take the initiative and wipe out all the pirates, big and small, in the Northwest Bay, so I can sleep soundly." Bryce, your excellency is right, and then there's the great pirate Edward. Although we don't know what he's doing, he could return any day now. We must prepare in advance. If we kill his henchman, he'll definitely retaliate. I can't abandon Fland Harbor and run away again, otherwise, wouldn't what I said at the public trial be a slap in my own face? Cecil, Your Excellency is truly far-sighted. Paul looked troubled. I know you're all speaking the truth, but in public, it's best to avoid saying things that might be mistaken for flattery. It can be embarrassing. Let's offer more constructive suggestions instead. Everyone was speechless. Ahem. Bryce cleared his throat awkwardly and said, Your Excellency, I could recommend a naval officer to you. Would you like to hear about him? Oh? Tell me about him. Captain Austin Kelly of the 6th Company, 2nd Battalion comes from a family of shipping merchants. He's been at sea since childhood, making a living with his elders and is used to rough seas. I think he's a very suitable naval prospect. Paul stroked his chin and thought for a moment. Have him come to me when we get back. We have to make do with this situation. Is there anyone else? Bryce scratched the back of his head. That's the only one I can think of for now. As they talked, they arrived near the church entrance, where they saw a group of people gathered. On the steps stood Father Morrison, gesturing wildly and speaking loudly. Everyone listened intently, and the priest's voice carried from afar. After I finished praying, I slowly opened my eyes. Standing before me was a ferocious-looking man, one of Shark's henchmen. Because I refused to submit to him, he sent an executioner to end my life. Just when I thought I was going to heaven to serve the Almighty Lord, suddenly there was a loud bang. I looked closely and saw a gaping hole in the wicked man's chest. He struggled and twisted, his eyes filled with endless fear as he ended his life of depravity and sin. The townspeople surrounding him listened silently as Morrison described the scene. I looked up and saw a figure appear in the doorway. The figure wasn't tall, but it gave me immense peace. A ray of golden sunlight shone on him, making him appear so holy and radiant. I thought to myself, is this an angel sent by the Almighty Lord to save me? Almighty and all-knowing Lord of Light, you have not abandoned your most devout servant after all. Morrison's narration was vivid and moving, captivating the audience. Yes, this angel is Lord Paul Gleman. Lord Paul Gleman is the angel sent by the Lord of Light to save me, and also the angel sent by the Lord of Light to save you, and the angel to save all living beings. He wields the thunder staff given to him by the Lord, and with a single strike, he can kill the devil's followers. He shares the great power bestowed upon him by God with his warriors who follow him, and with fearless spirit, he drives away the pirates entrenched in Franklin Harbor. A majestic voice resounds in my mind. Follow him, assist him. I know this is the divine decree given to me by the Lord of Light. Oh, the audience gasped in surprise. The common people of this era were still quite superstitious. Morrison made the sign of the cross, closed his eyes devoutly in prayer, and said, Praise be to the Almighty. The audience echoed, Praise be to the Almighty. Morrison continued, We will always follow your teachings. The audience echoed, We will always follow your teachings. Morrison then said, Praise be to the great Paul Gleman. The audience echoed, Praise be to the great Paul Gleman. Morrison declared, We will always follow in his footsteps. The audience echoed, We will always follow in his footsteps. Bryce remarked, It's a pity this priest isn't a theatrical actor. Cecil scoffed, All he does is flatter, a sycophant. He completely forgot that he had just been flattering the Earl. This guy's quick on the uptake. He grasped the superior's message so quickly. No wonder he'd survived so long in the pirate den. To be honest, Paul felt a little embarrassed watching this scene at the church entrance. It was downright cringe-worthy. But he was quite satisfied with Morrison. After all, the common people of this era were susceptible to this kind of behavior. Alright, let's go in from the back. Let's not disturb Mr. Morrison's performance. He chuckled and led everyone towards the back door of the church. In the afternoon, a nervous Captain Austin arrived at the Earl's temporary office. He snapped to attention, straightened up, and gave a salute. Reporting, Austin Kelly, Company Commander of the 6th Company, 2nd Battalion, reporting for duty. Paul looked Austin up and down, then pointed to the chair in front of the desk. Sit down, Captain. Yes, Your Excellency. After Captain Austin sat down, Paul asked, Captain, do you know why I called you here? Captain Austin blinked. You want to promote me? Damn. This guy really isn't polite at all. Why isn't he following the usual script? I'm really defeated. He could only say, You guessed right, Captain Austin Kelly. I called you here to promote you. Huh? Really? Captain Austin looked incredulous. He really guessed right? Chapter 39 Naval Discussion 2. Seeing Captain Austin's surprised expression, the Earl continued, It's not just a promotion, you're also being transferred to another branch of the military, the Navy. He'd just become the commander of the newly formed 6th Company, barely getting to know his men, and now he was being transferred to another unit. Wait, the Navy? Does Alda have a Navy? Austin looked puzzled. Paul noticed Austin's confusion and explained, yes, given the continued threat of piracy and for the sake of future long-distance trade, we're establishing a new branch of the military, the Navy. Austin understood. The Earl probably valued his familiarity with sea life from childhood. Someone must have recommended him. Long-distance trade? A good idea. It seemed he had a lot to offer. Sure enough, Paul continued, Bryce recommended you to me. He said you come from a family of ship merchants and have lived at sea with your elders since childhood, making you a very suitable naval prospect. Lord Bryce, you flatter me. Although secretly pleased, he still maintained a humble demeanor. Paul changed the subject. However, your position will be temporarily prefixed with acting. Whether it becomes official depends on your own abilities. Austin puffed out his chest. Please rest assured, Your Excellency, I will certainly not disappoint you. Paul waved his hand. Everyone will say that to me, but I care about the final results. Yes, sir. Where are the sailors now? We'll go to sea for training right now. He had to show his enthusiasm. Paul pointed at Austin. Right now, you're the only one left in the entire Navy. Austin, so he was a lone commander, huh? Was he going to have to row a boat and fight the pirates all by himself? Don't rush. Everyone's unfamiliar with the seas, so we're not acting rashly. I plan to organize the Navy into fleets, squadrons, companies, and companies. You'll be my acting commander of the Northwest Bay Fleet, and concurrently the acting commander of the 1st Detachment of the 1st Company of the 1st Squadron of the 1st Squadron of the Northwest Bay Fleet. This is a position as independent as Bryce's. Given your familiarity with maritime affairs, you can draft your own recruitment standards. I'll review them and then submit them to the recruitment office to recruit qualified soldiers and sailors, which you'll personally assess. Also, you're free to select and add experienced sailors from the 2 infantry battalions who are skilled in swimming and ship handling to your command, so we can quickly establish the Navy's framework. Austin was relieved. This made things much easier. Yes, Earl, we will certainly build up our combat capability as soon as possible. As for ships, for now we can only use captured pirate ships or requisition a batch of civilian vessels for training. But I will order the shipyard to urgently build a batch of warships. You can offer suggestions on the ship style, structure, and other details. I've known Supervisor Rubin of the shipyard since I was a child. I'll go talk to him. Paul nodded in satisfaction. Everything was going smoothly. Go back and estimate the necessary expenses. Come to my room tonight, and we'll discuss it in detail. Yes, sir. Captain Austin stood up, saluted, and turned to leave immediately, but then suddenly remembered something. Sir, I've suddenly thought of an idea. If you agree, it would be a great boost to our fighting strength. Paul immediately became interested. What idea? Stop talking nonsense and tell me quickly. Austin considered it carefully for a moment and said, I've been in charge of interrogating pirate prisoners. A considerable number of them were coerced into joining the pirates. They haven't done anything particularly bad, or their crimes are relatively minor. Could I hand these prisoners over to them and let them redeem themselves in the Navy? That's a request. Paul hesitated, his right hand resting on the table, his index and middle fingers tapping the surface alternately as he considered the feasibility of the suggestion. It's not impossible. Send me their files first, and we'll organize a team to screen them carefully. But even if we let them join the Navy, we mustn't let them appear in public. You're wise, sir. A well-timed compliment was necessary. But Austin still stood there, unmoved. Is there anything else? Austin stammered. Oh, that pirate captain named Quake. Perhaps we could consider him. His experience in naval command should be very rich, which is exactly what we lack. The Earl seemed to recall something unpleasant, and he stared at the captain with a sinister look. That pirate captain? The one who wrote the letter to humiliate me, Great Quake? Hey, don't go after him. Up, just pretend I didn't say anything. Captain Austin turned to leave. Paul waved his hand. Never mind. Bring his files over too. Let's take a look first. The next morning, Austin brought in a thick stack of notebooks, containing detailed records of the interrogations of a group of pirate prisoners with minor offenses. The paper used for recording was a new type of paper invented by Paul, which had already spread throughout the Northwest and was becoming increasingly popular. Paul summoned Schroeder, Joyce, Bryce, Claude, Cecil, and 5 other company commanders, along with Austin, to review these records and screen those who could serve in the Navy. This had to be done rigorously. The Navy was Paul's pride and joy, and he couldn't allow any bad apples to infiltrate. This Quake gang is really interesting. Looking through the files on the Quake gang pirates who had been captured earlier, Paul turned to Austin and said, "No wonder you wanted such a pirate leader." Yes, I think Quake and most of his men could be recruited. Indeed, the Quake gang was truly an anomaly among pirates. According to the records, they didn't seem to have any record of robbing ordinary civilians. They robbed the rich and some minor nobles. Strangely, they even helped some poor people. Of course, this was what they claimed. Moreover, they didn't rely on plundering for a living all year round, but were also merchants and traders, occasionally hiding their identities to do small-scale business such as short-distance shipping. Austin added, most of the members of the Quake gang came from bankrupt farmers and runaway slaves. Very few had any criminal records before joining the pirates. They've never gotten along with other pirates and have fought with several gangs. Paul nodded to himself. It has a bit of a Robin Hood vibe to it. No wonder Mudfish ran away without a word during the Battle of Lake Town, showing no brotherhood whatsoever. Actually, he was overthinking it. Pirates live a life of constant danger. There was no brotherhood among them, and infighting was commonplace. After careful screening, a total of 300 prisoners were selected. Paul thought for a moment and decided. It's impossible to recruit them all. Even if they haven't done anything particularly heinous, they at least need to meet our recruitment standards in terms of age and physical fitness. Also, we absolutely cannot accept troublemakers who have been disobedient while serving time in prison. Cecil, gather intelligence on the Quake gang's activities and see if they really haven't robbed civilians as they claim. Then he turned to Austin and said, these people should be recruited into the Navy in batches, scattered and assigned to various teams, and closely monitored. We must not let them form a clique. Austin accepted the order. Yes, Your Excellency. Chapter 40 Naval Discussion 3. Paul Gleman recently spent his free time studying ship catalogs he'd borrowed from shipyard supervisors. He discovered that even the popular boats in the south were galleys, similar to the galleys of the Mediterranean around the world. These were narrow, low, and agile vessels, propelled primarily by oars. While they were equipped with sails, these were merely to conserve the oarsman's energy for long voyages. Each side had only one row of long oars, some large enough to be over 10 meters long and weigh up to 300 kilograms. Therefore, each oar was typically operated by 3 to 8 people, and some large ships often had hundreds of oarsmen. Southern countries mostly used convicts and slaves as oarsmen, crammed into small spaces like sardines in a can. When the ships sailed, the oarsmen, under the threat of whips, frantically pushed their muscle engines to the rhythm of the drums. There's a saying that describes the life of a rower on a ship. If there truly is a hell on earth, then hell is on a rowing ship, where rest is a distant memory. Rowers spend their days with their decks, adrift at sea, subject to whistles and shouts, resorting to alcohol for courage or beatings in moments of tension. What an inhumane era. The wicked old society, Paul lamented, while simultaneously thankful for his relatively good birth after transmigrating. These rowing ships existed as early as the ancient Gabella Empire. Their enduring popularity stemmed from the calm waters of Horn Bay. The superior power and maneuverability generated by human oars in a short time were a significant advantage in that maritime environment, crucial for naval battles in southern countries and for merchants seeking refuge from pirates. Other countries, with less developed maritime trade, lacked the incentive to innovate shipbuilding technology, so they generally imitated ships from the Horn Bay region. Consequently, almost the entire world used Horn Bay rowing ships or their variants, such as the kind Paul had seen at the shipyard a few days ago. Galleons are mostly flat-bottomed vessels with a shallow draft, giving them an advantage in shallow waters but not on deep waters, as the crew, including oarsmen, is large and resupply is a major problem. Paul needed a fully wind-powered vessel capable of crossing oceans. According to his estimates, transporting goods south by sea from the Northwest Bay to Cape Bay would require a journey of over 2,000 nautical miles. If he didn't use southern merchants as intermediaries and instead traveled east to sell goods, the distance would be even greater. Such a distance, rowed by oarsmen, seemed unimaginable to him, at least in his view. Moreover, he harbored a small wish to recruit explorers for a circumnavigation like Magellan's. The world is so big, I want to see it for myself. The theory of a spherical Earth was widely accepted in most countries, but direct, effective evidence was still lacking. If the exploration he supported proved that the Earth beneath their feet was round, it would undoubtedly leave a significant mark on world history. However, As things stand, the conditions for fulfilling this wish are not yet in place. He found a carpenter and, based on his memories of his previous life, had 2 models of sailing ships made. One was modeled after the Swedish ship Nyhavna Udeborg, with a U-shaped hull that was narrower at the top and wider at the bottom, and 3 decks, a lower deck, an upper deck, and an open deck. 3 masts stood erect, each with square sails. The mainmast and foremast were equipped with topmast sails, midships sails, and mainsails, while the aftmast had a midships sail and a large triangular aftmast sail. At the bow was a bowmast with a triangular sail barricade, below which hung 2 more square sails, a slant sail and a slant midships sail. The triangular sails were designed to better utilize the Bernoulli effect, enabling the ship to sail against the wind. The U-shaped hull would allow for a larger cargo capacity, a deeper draft, and more stable sailing, but it also meant a greater risk of running aground or sinking. Paul envisioned such a ship, if built, as the mainstay of the Navy in its early stages, capable of traversing the world's oceans with impunity once equipped with cannons. Another model was that of a clipper ship. These ships had small freeboards and fewer superstructures, improving stability and maximizing the use of sails. They cruised almost skimming the waterline, their underwater shape designed for minimum drag to increase speed while maintaining a certain lateral drag profile, resulting in a particularly graceful waterline. The bow waterline was concave, and the long, sharp, curved scissor-shaped bow resembled a racing stance, allowing for wave cutting to reduce wave resistance, hence the name clipper. Compared to the Gothenburg, the clipper ship's bow extended the hull length, allowing for the addition of more rigging triangular sails, increasing sail capacity. The hollow bow facilitated raising the bow in waves, improving its directional stability. The gradually tapering, sloping waterline transitions harmoniously to the narrow, rounded stern, blending seamlessly with the elegant bow shape. However, clipper ships sacrifice carrying capacity for speed and are unsuitable for equipping numerous cannons. Paul intends to use these ships to transport small quantities of high-value cargo or to equip future Coast Guard forces for combating piracy and smuggling. Shipyard supervisor Ruben nearly popped his eyes out when he saw the 2 models. Indeed, regardless of whether the designs were reasonable in the eyes of the alien natives, their aesthetic appeal far surpassed that of current galleys. The novel and beautiful shapes made the shipyard supervisor's heart itch with desire. A work of art, Ruben shamelessly begged the Earl to leave the models in his shipyard, which suited Paul perfectly. He couldn't wait for the shipbuilding expert to study them further. He had originally intended to create a model of the legendary Age of Sail ship Victory for Ruben's reference, but considering the rudimentary conditions of his shipyard, building such a colossal vessel seemed like a pipe dream. He had to settle for building these smaller ships instead. He asked expectantly, "Could you build 2 actual vessels based on these 2 models?" However, even this hope was dashed. The shipyard supervisor examined the models carefully for a long time, finally stammering that with the shipyard's current technical capabilities and the craftsman's experience, even disregarding issues like raw materials, it would probably take a very, very long time to build them. Paul understood his meaning. This very, very long probably meant a very long time. "You might as well just say you can't build them," the Count said, his disappointment obvious. Ruben was getting anxious. He had finally gained the Count's attention, even sacrificing his painstakingly compiled ship illustrations. A sudden inspiration struck him, and he offered Paul a suggestion. "My lord, don't be hasty. Didn't you recently save a high-ranking figure from the Bayhorn Alliance? If we could recruit a group of craftsmen from the south through him, it should be helpful. I've heard that the shipbuilders in the south have built all sorts of strange and wonderful ships." The Earl looked at him with a playful smile and said, "Aren't you afraid that some of the new craftsmen will be more capable and take your place?" This, Ruben panicked a little. He hadn't considered this earlier, he had been too rash. Haha, seeing Ruben's unease, Paul stopped teasing him and patted him on the shoulder reassuringly. "Don't worry, as long as you old folks study hard, research diligently, and keep improving, I will never forget you. People from the same hometown are always close." "Yes, my lord. I will definitely study the technology diligently and live up to your expectations." Ruben sighed and patted his chest, promising. Paul looked out at the sea, silently thinking, it's time to have a word with that young Master Foster, thanks to, and for their generous donations. Thanks to C198,903 for their continued recommendations. Chapter 41 Talent Recruitment. Inside the inn where the Lichman adventurer group was staying, Quiller Foster was pestering the group members, insisting they grant her request. I've dreamed of being an adventurer since I was little. The world is so big, I want to see it, and then you got tied up in a thief's den, said the group leader, Meru, with a helpless expression. She was truly exasperated by this young master. He had a perfectly comfortable life to enjoy, yet he insisted on suffering. Ever since he learned of their adventurer group's reputation, this young master's attitude had changed completely, a far cry from his previous narcissistic self. Quiller persisted, her eyes sparkling. I've heard about the legendary experiences of your Lichman adventurer group. Leader, what do you think of my suggestion from yesterday? How about I join you? I'll cover all the group's expenses, and I won't take a single penny of the rewards. The moment she called her leader, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, except for Quiller, who remained oblivious, still staring at Meru with sparkling eyes. Seeing that a tragedy was about to occur, Dean immediately stepped between the two. I say, Master Foster, the life of an adventurer isn't as glamorous as you imagine. Living in the open, dealing with bandits and thugs, encountering venomous snakes and ferocious beasts, these are things we encounter frequently. Master Foster, however, became even more enthusiastic, clenching his fist and pumping it forcefully. That's the life of an adventurer. So exciting. Actually, most of it isn't very exciting. Most of it is just finding lost cats and dogs, quite boring. Dean had to change his approach to dampen his enthusiasm. Then a hand landed on his shoulder, a chilling aura emanating from behind. Dean. Once you find those disobedient cats and dogs, you have to teach them a lesson. Otherwise, they'll run off again. Dean turned and whispered, Hey, are you crazy? He's a nobleman, and the son of a powerful Marcus. Oh, he. Have you forgotten the second commission the Marcus gave us before we left? To properly discipline his son? I suddenly remembered. The female captain's knuckles cracked. What are you whispering about? Are you discussing my induction into the guild? The young master, Quiller, oblivious to the impending danger, looked at the two expectantly. Excuse me, Lord Griles invites Sir Quest to be his guest. Just as Dean gave up and secretly prayed for Quiller, a knock sounded at the door, and a servant announced this. HMPH. Good luck to him, Meru pouted, looking resentful. Since this guy was now a guest of the local lord, beating him to a pulp would be disrespectful. Quiller, completely unaware that he had just narrowly escaped death, chuckled. Excuse me, gentlemen, I'm going to see Lord Griles. We'll discuss the induction when I return. Any conditions are negotiable. Think it over carefully. With that, he opened the door and left with the Lord's messenger. Quiller Foster was invited to the shipyard by Paul. My dear friend, he exclaimed, giving Paul a warm bear hug. He was genuinely grateful to the young earl. After all, he was the one who had truly rescued him from the pirates. Sir Foster, Quiller immediately feigned displeasure. Too formal. Just call me Quiller from now on. In that case, you can call me Paul, my friend. Paul returned the favor. Although the other men didn't currently hold a formal title. His father was a Marcus and a powerful figure in the Corner Bay Alliance Council. Quiller was indeed very happy, smiling as he asked, So, Brother Paul, what brings you to your shipyard? Of course, I'm delighted to be invited by a friend. Quiller, what are your plans for the near future? Any schedules or anything like that? Oh, I've already sent a message home. I plan to stay here for 10 days or so, sightseeing in the north. I'm getting really bored in that pirate's den. After that, I plan to go home. It wouldn't be good to keep my family worried for too long. Paul spread his hands. Welcome. I hope you'll feel at home here. However, I hope you can do me a small favor after you go home. The young master immediately thumped his chest loudly. Sure thing. I, Quiller Foster, have always been ready to go to great lengths for my friends, especially since you're my savior. Slightly surprised that Quiller now lacked any aristocratic airs, Paul continued, What do you think of my shipyard? How does it compare to those large shipyards in the south? Well, Quiller chuckled and scratched his head, then hesitated slightly before saying, almost. Paul knew that the other man was just being polite. That almost was probably a world of difference. I have some goods I want to sell to your south, but we lack ships capable of long-distance ocean voyages. These days, galleys are popular, but they have difficulty traveling long distances. Could you help me recruit a group of shipbuilders after you return? Quiller nodded. No problem. Just tell me how many you need. I'll try my best to meet your quantity requirements, but I can't guarantee the quality. Skilled shipbuilders are highly paid back home, and employers don't easily let people go. No problem, as long as they have shipbuilding experience. Paul suddenly remembered something and added, actually, it's not just shipbuilders, I need anyone with a skill, especially those who are literate and can do arithmetic. I'll give you a list later, and please try your best to recruit them. I'll reimburse their travel expenses. Although a little strange, Quiller agreed to Paul's request, and then he was led to 2 models of new sailing ships. These 2 ships are quite unique. Quiller stroked his chin, carefully examining the models before him. Paul asked, do you think it's possible to build such a ship with current technology? Quiller replied, I don't know much about shipbuilding, but craftsmen in the south have tried all sorts of strange contraptions that can operate in the sea. Paul immediately became interested. Oh? What kind? Like giant tanks that can submerge to the bottom of the sea, or perpetual motion machines? It seems like people have built strange ships like yours, but most of them were failures or completely impractical. You know, there are always some fools who think they're geniuses, fantasizing about getting rich overnight with some ridiculous idea that popped into their heads while they were drunk. Sorry, I wasn't talking about you. Queller suddenly realized that the maker of these 2 strange ship models might be his younger brother, and awkwardly couldn't continue. Haha. There really are all kinds of people in this world. Let them all come to me. The young count, far from being bothered, laughed heartily. Thanks to Starry Sky King and QB for the recommendation tickets. Dear readers, please continue to collect and recommend. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42 Kingdom Crisis 1. After visiting the shipyard, Paul and Quill strolled to the seaside to enjoy the scenery. The weather was lovely, and a slightly fishy sea breeze blew gently, making them feel refreshed. Quill suddenly asked curiously, what are you planning to sell? Some novelties, a new type of paper, cheap and plentiful, not as expensive as parchment. And a beautiful piece of tableware that you'll absolutely love, Paul said with a hint of pride. Recalling the Europeans' fascination with porcelain, he was confident he could make a fortune. He pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to Quill, saying, this is the paper I'm selling. I'll be returning to Lake Town in a few days. Would you like to come with me to see that tableware? It's really much prettier than the pottery we use. Sure, I'll definitely go, Quill said, taking the paper and exclaiming, you mean this paper can be mass-produced? The southern countries were economically developed, and daily commercial activities required a large amount of paper. Contracts, accounting, letters, and other activities consumed countless amounts of paper every day. Economic prosperity brought cultural flourishing, and the cultural industry was a major consumer of paper. If a new type of paper were readily available and cheap enough, finding a market for it wouldn't be a problem. Yes, in my workshop, with the same manpower and time, I can increase production to dozens of times that of parchment. Actually, Paul made this up on the spot. He didn't know exactly how many times, but given the abundance of raw materials and the ability to hire more people if needed, he figured 30 or 40 times more wouldn't be a problem. Suddenly, another idea popped into his head, and he slapped his forehead. Right, I've heard that your southern culture is highly developed, with countless great writers and playwrights. The young master put his left hand on his hip, smoothed his hair with his right, and revealed a hint of pride. You flatter me. Although we southerners are not as militarily powerful as you northerners, when it comes to literature and art, we really can't be too modest. Haha, his expression made it seem as if he himself was a literary master. Paul immediately adopted an expectant expression. I've long admired this. Could you send me some popular literary works, like novels or poems, when you get back? Queller was filled with pride. Sure. Ha, but why do you want to go by sea? There are quite a few ports on the west coast of the Kingdom of Waldo that can be used for resupply, aren't there? What if you encounter extreme weather or your ship breaks down? Paul said helplessly. There's no other way. You've been imprisoned by pirates for several months. You probably don't know that there's a war going on in the south of our country, do you? To be disrespectful to His Majesty the King, this war has no end in sight. I don't want my caravan to pass through war-torn areas. What if we get robbed? Even if there's no war, there are checkpoints everywhere along the way. Just paying taxes will skin us alive. Quiller feigned understanding. I just heard about it. It's Giles the Greedy Wolf, right? He's a dangerous fellow, quite famous even in our country. But he's far superior to any other lord in your land. He's made a fortune by controlling trade between Aldo and Horn Bay through lower tariffs and preferential treatment for merchants." Quiller suddenly remembered something. He paused, glanced around, and whispered in Paul's ear, "I'll tell you a secret, but don't tell anyone else." Seeing his mysterious tone, Paul's curiosity was piqued, and he nodded in agreement. "Don't worry, I'll keep it a secret," Quiller whispered. "I suspect your royal family is in serious trouble this time. Giles has a powerful backer." "What did you say?" Paul looked astonished, as if he'd heard something incredible. "I mean, your Aldo kingdom is very likely to undergo a dynastic change." Seeing his friend stunned by the secret he'd revealed, Quiller felt a sense of satisfaction. Paul looked at him incredulously. "Don't lie to me. Giles started the rebellion after you fell into the pirate's den. How do you know he has someone backing him? And someone powerful enough to overthrow the royal family? You don't think Giles just suddenly had the idea to rebel a few months ago, do you? He's been preparing for it for years. The high-ranking officials of various countries are well aware of it. But I only found out about his backing by chance shortly before I left home. It's probably this support that made him finally decide to rebel." "And how did you accidentally find out? Have you forgotten that my father is a member of the council?" "I secretly looked at some documents in his study. It seems some merchants from the Bayhorn Alliance are transporting supplies to Giles's territory by sea for that backing force, large quantities of weapons, food, and so on. The amount is staggering. That's why I said your king is in a bit of trouble this time." Paul frowned. If that were the case, as a lord, he would have to carefully consider choosing sides. The Gleman family had been relegated to the Northwest Bay because they had chosen the wrong side before. Queller seemed to sense Paul's thoughts and put his hand on his shoulder, saying, "If you don't have the strength to protect yourself, then be a fence-sitter for now, and state your position once the situation becomes clear. If things really come to a point where everything is beyond repair, come find me at Horn Bay. You saved my life, I'll protect you for life." Being a fence-sitter also requires some strength, Paul thought to himself, but Queller's words were very touching. He looked up into Quiller's sincere eyes. "Thank you, Quiller." Then, curiously, he asked, "Which side does your Bayhorn Alliance support?" Quiller immediately replied, "Since its inception, the Bayhorn Alliance has adhered to the diplomatic principle of armed neutrality. We just want to do business quietly and won't get too involved in the internal conflicts of other countries. If we make the wrong bet, we might lose all our business." He changed the subject. "At least that's the official stance. As for what happens behind the scenes, I'm not interested in politics and know very little. After all, a country's existence to this day is unlikely to be as simple as it appears on the surface." He continued, "Third-party business like transporting goods isn't prohibited by Horn Bay law. If your king places an order, our merchant guild will accept it without hesitation. Then do you know who's behind Giles? As long as it doesn't harm the alliance's own interests, the council has no right to investigate trade secrets. The documents don't specify who it is. However, the range of possibilities isn't very large. Aldo isn't a small country anymore. How many forces could possibly have the ability to interfere with you? Besides, I remember those merchant guilds do business in the eastern part of Horn Bay. That's a brilliant idea. Transporting goods by sea is easy to conceal and allows for enormous volumes. Since it involves large quantities of military equipment and grain, it's probably a national-level operation. East of Horn Bay? Isn't that the Trianni Sea? The only entities close to the Trianni Sea with the capacity to support Giles are likely the papacy and the Gabella Empire." Chapter 43 Kingdom Crisis 2. The weather at sea is unpredictable. Just a moment ago the sky was clear, and now it's suddenly overcast. No wonder I haven't seen many ships out to sea today. I really should have asked an experienced fisherman about the weather, Gleman said, quite annoyed. He turned to Queller and said, "I'll take you back to the inn by carriage. It'll be good shelter in case it rains on the way." Queller readily agreed. "Thank you for your trouble, brother." The two boarded Paul's carriage, and the driver flicked the reins, heading towards the inn in town. Along the way, Paul was still considering the power behind Giles. He felt that the most likely culprit was the papacy, and his reasons were quite valid. There had been a major conflict between the previous king of the Kingdom of Aldo and the papacy. It was nothing more than the old-fashioned conflict between theocracy and secular monarchy. That year, the Archbishop of the Kingdom of Aldo was called by the Lord. Traditionally, When the position of archbishop of a country became vacant, the papacy and the country's leadership would first consult with each other to find a candidate that satisfied both sides. Then the papacy would issue a proclamation, and the country's leadership would publicly acknowledge the appointment, and everyone would be happy. However, this time, two strong contenders emerged. One was a bishop from Aldo himself, who had joined a monastery in his youth, starting as the head of a grassroots village church, serving diligently for decades until rising to the position of regional bishop. He was highly respected throughout the kingdom and a close friend of the old king, making him the most popular candidate to succeed the archbishop. The other was a bishop from another country, parachuted in by the papacy. He had not served in the kingdom for long, but had taught at the seminary in the Holy Capital, with students spread throughout the continent. The old king Rodney XV was no fool, both publicly and privately. He supported his own countrymen and his friend to become archbishop. The papacy wasn't stupid either. Everyone knew the relationship between the Aldo bishop and the king. How could they play by force if their own archbishops and diocesan nobles formed an alliance? They directly supported the foreign bishop they had sent. The two sides clashed over the archbishop's position, engaging in countless open and covert battles. Rumors circulated that during a private, cordial meeting, the old king, in a moment of excitement, playfully put his dentures on the face of the papacy's envoy. Ultimately, the kingdom and the papacy reached a compromise. The archbishop's position would go to someone supported by the papacy, but in return, regional bishops of the Aldo kingdom would be appointed primarily from their own country, with half of the regional bishops being appointed based on royal recommendations. Although a compromise was reached at the time, a grudge was formed, and Rodney XV, who later succeeded to the throne, spent considerable effort repairing relations with the papacy. Therefore, Paul speculated that Giles's backing was likely the papacy, but after further consideration, he decided against it. The clash between divine and royal authority has happened before. The papacy's most common method was to openly excommunicate the ruler of a country that opposed it, or to find a compliant representative among the nobles of that country and declare this person the legitimate ruler recognized by the Lord of Light. Simple, brutal, and effective. It is said that the papacy once forced a monarch to stand barefoot in the snow for 3 days and 3 nights by means of excommunication. Such sneaky maneuvering is not like the papacy's style. Perhaps the papacy feels its influence has declined and that a direct confrontation would be disadvantageous, so it has changed its strategy. But there has been no record of Giles being particularly enthusiastic towards the papacy. Then, is it the Gabella Empire? That's unlikely too. The kingdom of Aldo and the Gabella Empire have been related by marriage for generations, and the two countries have a very close relationship. Just as Paul was lost in thought, Quiller, sitting next to him, sighed that Giles is extremely ambitious. If he takes over the kingdom of Aldo, he'll probably have ulterior motives towards the Hornby Alliance. I really don't know what those merchant guilds are thinking. They're willing to disregard national interests for money. I hope the council can take some action. It was time for Paul to show off again, and he immediately cleared his throat, feigning profundity, and said, Quiller, a philosopher once said something like this: with appropriate profit, capital becomes bold. With 10% profit, it will be used everywhere. With 20% profit, it becomes active. With 50% profit, it takes risks. With 100% profit, it dares to trample on all human laws. With 300% profit, it dares to commit any crime, even risking the gallows. I have never heard of that before, but that statement is indeed very true. Quiller shrugged in agreement. Our Hornby Alliance is a nation built on commerce. Although we have laws that seem incredibly comprehensive to outsiders, everyone has to adapt to them and also learn how to exploit their loopholes. Coming from a large family, Quiller was used to such things. He tilted his head back, hands behind his head. So, after I turned 16, I dreamed of becoming an adventurer, traveling the world carefree and unburdened, avoiding all those annoying rules and regulations. So you came to Northwest Bay to adventure. That's right, and my dad even commissioned the Lichman adventurers to find me. It's a fantastic opportunity, and I really want to join them. Quiller suddenly became excited. The Lichman adventurer group? Those people from the church the other day? Yes, this adventurer group is very famous in the South. They've resolved many crises. Paul asked with some doubt. Is adventurer just another name for mercenary? No, no, no. Quiller waved his index finger left and right, denying Paul's statement. Although both are paid to solve problems, adventurers have their own moral standards and a complete set of industry regulations. Moreover, major countries and regions have specialized organizations like adventurer guilds, which provide services such as posting commissions and collecting rewards for adventurers, and also serve to regulate them, monitoring whether adventurers violate industry regulations and local laws. In comparison, mercenaries are less regulated, have lower standards for accepting commissions, and are often active in wars between nations. They also frequently commit murder and robbery for their employers for money. Then can you tell me about the Lichman Adventurer Group? What are their individual skills? Oh, I only know these 4 members who came to rescue me. The pink-haired girl is named Mayruheimer. She's petite but very strong, and her weapon is an unusual chain. She's the leader. The blue-haired youth is Denithika. He's skilled with daggers and quite agile. He's responsible for reconnaissance and tracking. The yellow-haired youth is named Kai. He's very muscular and a great swordsman. The green-haired girl is named Laddie. She's quite special. Her main profession is a scholar. She joined the adventurers group to travel and broaden her knowledge, but she also possesses unique skills. She serves as the archer in the group and also has some medical knowledge. Paul asked curiously, a scholar who can use a crossbow? That's quite rare. Exactly. Queller slapped his thigh. That guy Dean said Miss Laddie can shoot a fly from 150 meters away. I bet he's exaggerating. It's impressive that a girl can even draw a bow. Chapter 44 The Mystery of the Fire. The capital of the Kingdom of Waldo, Crystal Radiance Castle, remains shrouded in a tense and oppressive atmosphere. Although some time had passed since the royal army recaptured the capital, the level of martial law had not lessened in the slightest. Guards were stationed every 5 or 10 steps along the streets and alleys, and patrolling soldiers frequently stopped anyone they deemed suspicious, interrogating them in detail about their ancestors. The once bustling taverns were eerily quiet. Customers came in, bought their drinks, and left in a hurry. Those few who did sit down for a drink merely chatted about everyday matters, showing none of the unrestrained, pontificating pronouncements that usually accompanied their drinking. A carriage sped towards the palace, carrying a tall, thin man with a mustache, Earl Merlin, who oversaw the kingdom's intelligence system. At this moment, Earl Merlin was resting with his eyes closed, appearing calm to outsiders, but in reality, he was deeply troubled. On the very night the princess led her army to recapture the capital, a massive fire broke out at the location of the capital's granaries, burning 8 or 9/10 of the large amount of grain stored there. This fire had severe consequences, directly disrupting the royal army's plans to march south and quell the rebellion. Fire prevention was always of paramount importance in the daily management of granaries, with extremely strict measures in place. Even in the event of a fire, it was impossible for almost all the warehouses to be ablaze. Clearly, this was a provocation, a serious provocation. Giles, this traitor, was blatantly slapping the royalists in the face. You think you've won? I have plenty of ways to deal with you, right under your noses. You didn't expect that, did you? One can imagine how furious Princess Catherine was. At the emergency meeting following the fire, in a fit of emotion, the princess drew her sword and cleaved the table in two, vowing to never forgive Giles. Earl Merlin, as the head of intelligence, was naturally ordered to investigate the truth behind the fire, but the more he investigated, the more perplexing the situation became. He mentally reviewed the information he had gathered, pondering how to report the case to His Majesty the King and His Highness the First Princess. King Rodney's V of Aldo had finally recovered from his illness and, after being brought back to the capital by his daughter, was now able to attend to state affairs. Earl Merlin entered the palace after a thorough search by the royal guards. Even a core member of the royal party like himself was not exempt in these extraordinary times. He hurried to the door of Rodney's V's study. An attendant announced his arrival, and His Majesty immediately granted him entry. Upon entering the study, Earl Merlin found His Highness the First Princess, Catherine, already there. Lord Merlin, how is the investigation into the granary fire progressing? His Majesty waved his hand to stop Earl Merlin's bow and rushed to the point. King Rodney's V, nearing 40, was usually a kind-faced monarch, but due to his tireless work on state affairs, a few strands of gray had already appeared at his temples, despite his relatively young age for a nobleman. At this moment, the king wore a worried expression, his brow furrowed with obvious anxiety. Your Majesty, I am incompetent. There has been no substantial breakthrough in the case. Although heartbroken to hear such bad news so soon after the king's recovery from a serious illness, Earl Merlin, after much deliberation, ultimately chose to report the truth. Princess Catherine, standing beside the king, asked, "Have you encountered difficulties?" "Yes, Your Highness." "Please allow me to explain." Earl Merlin took out a roll of parchment and began to report the information he currently possessed. According to the sentry on duty, the fire started after the warehouse supervisor, Fowler Bart, went in. When Fowler Bart went in, another soldier volunteered to go in to provide light and followed him in. No one else went in at any other time, so the culprit is one of these two. The Earl nodded. "Let's talk about this soldier first. We've collected information on him. He has a clean background and has served under Viscount Klein for over 3 years. Those who know him well have a good impression of him. Even Klein knows him and doesn't believe he's a spy. None of them remember this soldier doing anything suspicious. You know, military camps are much more secluded than other places. It's almost impossible to hide it from everyone," Catherine said, "so the possibility of this soldier being the culprit is low." "What about Bart?" the Earl continued. "The warehouse supervisor is indeed a strong suspect." "You should know the supervisor," Catherine replied. "Yes, in my memory, he's very capable and hard-working. During his tenure as supervisor, there was never any theft or embezzlement in the warehouse. We questioned everyone in his network, colleagues, friends, superiors, and subordinates, and none of them mentioned anything unusual. He's usually quite loyal to the royal family. During the Hales Rebellion, he was even harassed by the rebels because of it. So, he has relatives." The princess noticed something missing from the list of identities Earl Merlin had provided. Earl Merlin nodded again. "Your Highness is wise. According to Fowler Bart's wife, this manager is a bit unusual." "How so?" "Manager Bart is otherwise unremarkable. Because of his position, he sees many grain merchants from various places every day, making it difficult to investigate whether any of them are suspicious. But his biggest suspicion is his recent mental health issues." Catherine was slightly annoyed. "You don't mean to say that Manager Bart is actually mentally ill, so it's understandable that he suddenly went crazy and burned down the warehouse for fun?" Earl Merlin hurriedly replied, "That's not what I meant, Your Highness. Manager Bart's mental state had been perfectly normal before this, and his family has no history of related illnesses. The suspicious situation started about 2 months before the fire, the period around the time the Giles Rebellion began." "Yes, Your Highness." According to Mrs. Bart, her husband suddenly began to suffer from insomnia during that time, unable to sleep night after night. He tried all sorts of sleeping pills, but to no avail. After a painful and exhausting period, Steward Bart was finally able to fall asleep, but he began to talk in his sleep. However, Mrs. Bart swore that she had never heard her husband talk in his sleep since they had slept in the same bed. Catherine asked in surprise, "What did Bart say?" Rodney's V, who had been sitting quietly behind his desk listening, also sat up straight, awaiting Earl Merlin's reply. Earl Merlin, glancing down at the documents, replied, "Most of it is incoherent rambling. I've recorded a few that Mrs. Bart could understand." He placed the scroll on the king's desk with both hands. After the king and princess finished reading, they found the following sentences recorded on it. "Who are you? Stop following me. Where am I? Why can't I turn around? I don't want to hear your nonsense. Get out of my head. I've done everything you asked. Everything is in place. No one will find out. Please leave. I won't do this. I'll be hanged. Spare me. Please spare me. Master, Master, I will continue to listen to your holy teachings. Do not abandon me. Your servant will fulfill his mission to the death, my supreme master." Earl Merlin added, "The last 2 weeks' conversation is particularly suspicious." The last sentence was the last thing Mrs. Bart heard talking in her sleep. Although she had been suffering from insomnia for a while, the steward still maintained the habit of going to bed early. Mrs. Bart was worried about her husband and hadn't slept. Her husband woke up shortly after saying that sentence, saying he wanted to go for a walk to get some fresh air, and then, the warehouse caught fire. Catherine and Rodney's V exchanged a glance, both seeing the question in each other's eyes. "What is this?" Seeing the puzzled king and princess, Earl Merlin, who was also confused, suddenly had a strange thought. Was Steward Bart under some kind of spell or witchcraft? He quickly shook his head, banishing this absurd idea from his mind. Chapter 45 Father-Daughter Conflict. Count Morin banished the fleeting, absurd thought from his mind. Magic? How could that be? The church's charlatans always used legends of evil wizards and witches to frighten ordinary people, and they even established a tribunal. Some charlatans would casually probe here and there with a broken stone, claiming to be searching for traces of magic and witchcraft. Because of their influence, the public, especially the lower classes, believed these claims wholeheartedly. However, to the few well-educated people, the stories of wizards and witches were nothing more than fabrications by the church to expand its influence. As time progressed, many mysterious phenomena were given reasonable explanations, such as the ghost fire phenomenon in tombs. Previously, the church attributed it to evil spirits, but later, after research by alchemists, it was simply the spontaneous combustion of a substance called phosphorus. Because the lies were exposed, the church was quite unfriendly to these scholars who dared to explore the unknown, and many were labeled as wizards and persecuted. However, this did not deter people's curiosity. Even within the church, factions emerged, advocating for approaching and understanding the divine through exploring the unknown and studying nature, such as the famous Mindful Church. The church forcibly linked people or things it could not explain to witchcraft or demonic possession, exploiting people's fears to strengthen their dependence on the church. This view had already spread to a small circle among the high-ranking nobles, who believed that wizards and magic were concocted to deceive the ignorant. Earl Merlin himself believed this, although most nobles still held the attitude of better safe than sorry. Please continue to investigate this matter, Lord Merlin. But no matter what the truth is, the reality of food shortages remains unchanged. The king broke the silence in the study, voicing the most pressing issue. Catherine frowned and said, "Father, I have ordered the gathering of provisions within the royal domains, but it will take a considerable amount of time. Even if we manage to gather some provisions, it won't be enough to support the army's long expedition southward." Rodney's V fell silent for a long time before saying, "We can only purchase from the lords who support the royal family. The king should be self-sufficient is an unwritten rule in this world." Since the collapse of the ancient Gabella Empire, numerous new regimes, large and small, have been established on its territory. These newly formed nations are frequently at war, and their monarchs do not possess the vast territories of the Gabella Empire to govern. Their wealth is insufficient to support a large standing army. To meet military needs, nations generally employ two methods to maintain their military strength. The first is to maintain only a small number of elite troops in peacetime, such as various knightly orders, and to conscript large numbers of civilians to form a large army during wartime. Secondly, a feudal system was adopted. The king granted land to meritorious nobles, making them lords. These lords could then distribute land within their territories to their vassals, who in turn could grant land to their own vassals, and so on down to the knightly class. Lords relied on the income from their own territories to build their military forces, and during wartime, they were obligated to respond to their lord's call and provide their military strength for his use. Correspondingly, lords had no obligation to pay taxes to their lord, or only paid a token amount. Royal families in various countries generally relied on the income from their directly controlled territories to meet their expenses. Therefore, while King Rodney's V could summon lords from various regions to lead troops to his aid, he did not have the authority to order the mobilization of grain reserves from the lords' lands. Of course, legally he could forcibly issue such an order, but the result would certainly be to force more lords to join Giles. Catherine suggested, "Let our royal envoys, whom we previously dispatched, communicate with the lords in their respective territories and try to lower the price as much as possible." The king agreed, and Earl Merlin accepted the order. The royal envoys were handled by his intelligence network. He took out a second scroll and handed it to the king and princess, reporting, "There's another important piece of intelligence. Our investigation shows that Giles does indeed have someone backing him." The king unfolded the scroll and read the intelligence with the princess. Catherine murmured, "No wonder. A year ago, he didn't have enough strength, but a year later, he's so confidently raising the banner of rebellion." The earl looked at the princess and said, "Our analysis suggests that the forces supporting him might be over there." He pointed eastward as he spoke. The princess glared at the earl. "Don't speak recklessly without solid evidence." The earl bowed and replied, "Yes, your highness." The king suddenly said, "Don't say that, Lord Merlin. Relationships between nations are very complex. There are too many instances of saying one thing to someone's face and another behind their back." The princess wanted to say something, but hesitated. King Rodney's V glanced lovingly at his eldest daughter, his greatest pride, so outstanding at such a young age, though she still needed more experience in politics. He turned to Earl Merlin and said, "Very well, Lord Merlin, you should go back and rest today. You've worked hard these past few days. It is my duty, I dare not complain." Earl Merlin bowed and took his leave, exiting the study. Only the father and daughter remained in the study. King Rodney's V stood up and slowly walked to the window. The king, with his back to the princess, said, "Catherine, there is something I must tell you." The princess waited quietly for her father's next words, but instead heard news that shocked her immensely. "I intend to marry your sister to Veblen." The study fell silent, broken only by the chiming of the grandfather clock. Catherine was speechless for a moment. Finally, she asked, "Why, why?" The princess knew perfectly well, Duke Veblen was the most powerful lord in the kingdom's eastern border, and also the most powerful among those currently wavering, undecided on which side to support. The king didn't answer. He knew his daughter understood his intentions. "Eileen is only 15. Did she agree?" The princess's tone suddenly sharpened. The king, still with his back to her, said softly, 15 isn't young," without mentioning whether Catherine's sister had agreed. "But that Veblen is almost 50. And has such a bad reputation. You're actually going to marry your own daughter to such a man?" The princess raised her voice, almost shouting. "Enough. My mind is made up. Step aside." The king turned abruptly, glaring at his eldest daughter sternly, his eyes no longer showing the previous affection, but instead revealing a resolute intent. Catherine understood the meaning in her father's eyes. She looked at him coldly and said, "Yes, your majesty." She turned and walked out, slamming the study door shut. Rodney's V stood blankly by the window for a long time before sighing, walking to his desk, and slumping weakly into a chair. This daughter was still too naive in politics. Chapter 46. Returning to Lake Town. Paul Gleman stayed in Port Flanders longer than initially expected. During this time, he met with merchants of all ranks in the town, expressing his vision for developing overseas trade. He planned to establish a trading company. The concept of a company didn't yet exist in this world, and have the merchants of his territory invest. Before their lord, the merchants were all obsequious. In this world, apart from the Corner Bay Alliance, which was based on commerce, merchants from other countries had little political standing and were often exploited by powerful figures. When Paul announced his vision, his lordly status naturally earned him applause, though everyone secretly assumed his lord was short of funds and would use the usual noble tactic of fabricating a reason to ask for money. Paul saw through their insincerity, but he wasn't angry. Changing people's perceptions took time. He was merely giving the merchants a heads up and didn't intend to raise funds immediately. There were still remnants of pirates on the sea that hadn't been completely wiped out, and the full-sail ships for ocean voyages hadn't even been built yet. It was too early to make grand promises. He also met with a former mayor, old Peter, who had regained consciousness under the careful care of his granddaughter, Susan. After regaining his senses, someone told him what had happened at the church that day, which frightened him so much that he immediately jumped out of bed and, despite not being fully recovered, went to Paul to apologize and beg for forgiveness for his granddaughter's offense. Paul comforted him gently, and it took a lot of effort to convince the old man that he wouldn't hold a grudge. Upon learning that he had been dismissed from his position as mayor by the Lord and reassigned as an advisor to the new mayor, old Peter felt a deep sense of loss. Although he had often been caught in the middle in this position, like a rat in a bellows, he had served in it for most of his life, and the sudden removal from the post was difficult to adjust to. However, he expressed his determination to do his best to assist the new mayor in completing his duties. Old Peter was overjoyed and deeply grateful to Paul upon learning that the new lord had wiped out the pirates and promised to protect the town forever. He repeatedly prayed to the Lord of Light to bless the Lord with a long and healthy life. Meanwhile, the various tasks related to the establishment of the Navy were proceeding at a rapid pace. After the recruitment standards were set, more than 300 new recruits were gradually enlisted. Austin, the naval commander of the Northwest Bay Fleet who had been promoted to acting major and concurrently the commander of the 1st Squadron of the 1st Group of the Northwest Bay Fleet, was extremely busy these past few days, with almost no time to rest. The shipyard, overseen by Reuben, worked overtime to produce 2 galleys with rams and converted 4 fishing boats for naval training. The new mayor and deputy mayor, selected by Steward Ford, arrived in Flanders Port shortly after the public trial and quickly began their administrative duties. Following Paul's orders, they would transplant the system from Lakeside Town to Port Franklin, including public toilets, public bathhouses, garbage cans, and hot water stations. The Earl also instructed them to conduct a census and other related work. Paul further instructed them to respect their advisor, old Peter, to humbly learn from him, and to cooperate effectively. Additionally, the town's central church was ordered to be converted into a building called the Government Building, serving as the offices for administrative personnel. A new church would be built elsewhere, with the Earl hinting to the new mayor that it should be located in a remote area. In July, Paul decided to return to Lakeside Town. Before departing, he inspected the nascent naval force and declared, "Our journey is to the stars and the sea." While the word stars was somewhat cryptic, it didn't stop the young men in his group from getting excited, clamoring to feed the remaining pirates to the fish. The 2nd Infantry Battalion was left behind in Franklin Harbor to assist the still developing Navy in defending against pirates. After bidding farewell to everyone, the Earl led the 1st Infantry Battalion toward Lake Town. The temperature in July was already quite hot, and near noon, the sun was scorching the earth. "It's much cooler here than in the south," said Quiller Foster from the Horn Bay Alliance happily. Young Master Foster would be accompanying Paul to Lake Town to see the novelties he was going to sell. Having become an adventurer's ideal, he was interested in anything unfamiliar. However, his ideal encountered some setbacks. The leader of the Lichman Adventurers Guild, Meru, still hadn't agreed to let him join the guild, and was quite dissatisfied with young Master Foster's decision to stay in the Northwest Bay for a while. Since Quiller was staying, they had to go with him. If they left Quiller behind and went back, they wouldn't get their mission commissions, and the guild's mission completion rate would decrease. Naturally, the Lichman Adventurers Guild also had to go with Quiller to Lake Town to ensure his safety. Paul and he chatted idly along the way. "Really? I still feel quite hot." Having grown up in the north, Paul had never experienced the southern heat, and his words made Quiller feel ungrateful. "But look at that girl named Laddie, it's so hot and she's all bundled up. It's really strange," Paul whispered to Quiller. "Now that you mention it, it's true, and there's not even a drop of sweat on her face." Quiller also noticed the oddity. Even though Quiller and the rest of the Lichman Adventurers group were from the south and more resistant to heat, they were still wearing as little as possible, and even so, sweat was constantly seeping from their faces. Only the scholar Laddie was still wrapped in thick, heavy clothing and wearing a scholar's hat, which looked odd with the bow and arrows she carried. Moreover, while everyone else was sweating profusely from the journey, the scholar was completely unperturbed. She noticed Paul looking at her and immediately pulled her hat brim down to cover her face. "You've made her shy," Quiller teased. "No way, I think you've scared her," Paul vehemently denied. As noon approached, the Earl ordered a halt to the march, and the troops dispersed to rest in the shady woods along the roadside, taking care of their hunger. After setting up their guard, the soldiers went into the roadside woods and ate their rations. Paul, Quiller, and the others also sat on the ground, eating their own food. They noticed that the young Earl was eating the same black bread as the soldiers. The punk named Kai whispered to Dean, who was sitting next to him, "I thought this lord would treat us to a big meal." Dean rolled his eyes at him. "Dream on, even if you were to treat someone, it would be that young master." Just then, the scholar Laddie's ears twitched slightly. She looked up and said, "It sounds like someone's calling for help." Everyone tensed up immediately. Chapter 47 Danger in the Forest. Laddie looked up and said, "It sounds like someone's calling for help." Everyone tensed instantly. Could there be bandits or something robbing pedestrians nearby? Although their lord had been boasting about the effectiveness of his crackdown along the way, some people were bound to slip through. Everyone held their breath and listened intently, but heard nothing. Quiller chuckled and said, "Miss Laddie, you must have misheard," but the scholar remained frowning, pointing south. "It's in that direction, my lord." "Could you lend me a horse to confirm?" The adventurers had been riding in a cargo wagon the whole way, without horses. Paul nodded in agreement. All right. You can ride my horse, it's the fastest of these." He handed her a riding crop. Laddie skillfully mounted her horse and said to her adventurers, "Wait here for a moment, I'll be right back." She lightly cracked her whip, and the horse snorted, but only spun in place. Paul said sheepishly, "I forgot this beast only recognizes me. I'll ride it." The situation was urgent, so the scholar gave up the stirrups, and Paul climbed onto the horse and sat in front of her. Laddie was a little taller than him. "Hold on tight." Paul cracked his whip, and the mount galloped south. Bryce and Schroeder, who were resting nearby, heard the commotion and immediately ran over. "Nonsense," Bryce exclaimed anxiously after learning what had happened. They immediately gathered anyone nearby with a horse and set off south, the adventurers following closely behind. After riding for a while, the scholar said, "Closer." Paul listened intently again. Indeed, someone was shouting for help. He urged his mount to speed up. Thankfully the trees in the area weren't dense. As they rode, after rounding a few trees, the horse suddenly reared up, bringing the two riders to a screeching halt, nearly tumbling head over heels. Paul quickly looked ahead. "Damn," he exclaimed, a sense of foreboding washing over him. About 100 meters ahead stood a black-spotted tiger, confronting two men, one tall and one short. The taller man gripped a long sword tightly, shielding the shorter man behind him. This animal, the black-spotted tiger, looked remarkably similar to the Siberian tiger, except for its stripes, and was also at the top of the food chain among wild animals. Fortunately, the black-spotted tiger had its back to Paul and his companion, seemingly unaware of their approach. But the two men opposite the tiger were in grave danger. Although the distance made it difficult to see clearly, Paul felt their peril acutely. He immediately rolled off his horse, pulled out a flintlock pistol, and blew on it, attempting to ignite the matchlock. "Damn! Is the fuel all burned out? Why can't I blow it up?" Just as Paul was puffing out his cheeks and trying to reignite the flames, the scholar lady dismounted, untied the short bow she had been carrying, skillfully drew an arrow, nocked it, pulled back the bowstring, and aimed at the black-spotted tiger ahead. "Hey, scholar lady, even if your archery is superb, this distance is ridiculous," Paul thought to himself. The black-spotted tiger looked about the size of a toy cat from here. How could he possibly hide it? Just as Laddie was aiming, the large cat in the distance had already tensed its hind legs, ready to attack. In the blink of an eye, with a sharp cry, Laddie's arrow shot towards the black-spotted tiger like a meteor. Just as the beast was about to pounce, the arrow pierced the fur of its right thigh. Roar! The sudden pain made the beast roar wildly, startling a large number of birds in the surrounding forest into taking flight. Paul's mount, startled, neighed and bolted back the way it had come. The black-spotted tiger turned fiercely, quickly spotting the attacker from behind. It swiftly abandoned its previous target and charged towards Paul. Due to the distance and the short bow, the arrow hadn't penetrated deeply enough to cause any fatal injury. Watching the beast charging towards him like lightning, Paul's mind went blank. Holding the still unlit torch, he looked helplessly at the scholar. She had already knocked a second arrow. Her lips moved slightly, as if she were muttering something, but it was unintelligible. The second arrow was swiftly released, and to Paul's astonishment, it pierced the black-spotted tiger's right eye without missing a beat. Wounded in a vital spot, the beast could no longer endure the pain and collapsed to the ground in agony. Because of the close proximity, the arrow's force was almost undiminished, embedding itself deeply in the tiger's skull. After struggling for a moment, it lay still on the ground. The sound of hooves approached from behind. Bryce, Schroeder, and the others had arrived. They had heard the tiger's roar and, seeing the dead beast lying on the ground, knew without a doubt what had happened. They were all inwardly grateful for the Lord of Light's protection. "My lord, please don't put yourself in such danger again," Bryce said in a tone Paul had never heard before, a seriousness that even carried a hint of anger. Paul blushed. "I'm sorry, everyone. I was too reckless." Just then, the two women who had confronted the black-spotted tiger approached and thanked them. "Thank you so much for your help. May I ask your names?" Paul caught his breath and looked at the two women. They were two beautiful women. The taller woman was over 1.7 meters tall, with black hair, a pretty face, and a resolute expression. It seemed the crisis hadn't overly alarmed her. The younger woman, whom she had shielded behind, appeared shaken, her breathing still rapid. The girl was about Paul's height and age. She had lustrous blonde hair and fair, delicate skin. The blush on her cheeks from the recent close call only added to her charm. Paul straightened his hair, placed his hand on his chest, and introduced himself. "I am Paul Gleman, Lord of the Earl's domain of Arda in the Northwest Bay of the Kingdom of Aldo. Welcome to my territory. May I ask your identities?" "We've already arrived in the Northwest Bay." The two beautiful women before him exchanged bewildered glances. It seems these two are lost. Chapter 48 The Princess Who Left Home. After a brief moment of astonishment, the two beauties quickly regained their composure. The blonde girl tilted her head back. "HMPH, Northwest Bay it is, as long as they can't find us." That expression, that tone, how to put it? It gave Paul a sudden sense of familiarity. After pondering for a while, it dawned on him, Sundeer. Isn't that Sundeer? Before transmigrating, he thought it only existed in the world of anime, but unexpectedly, he'd encountered it in reality. He felt a strange little excited. "Where are you two from?" he inquired again, his tone extremely polite. The decorations on the blonde girl's clothes under her cloak were clearly not something ordinary people could wear, not even ordinary nobles. This wasn't something money could buy. At least in Paul's memory, he had never seen nobles from the Northwest wear such attire. But it wasn't that he had absolutely no recollection of it. Oh. Right, he had seen similar decorations in a painting in old Gleman's collection when he was a child. He vaguely remembered it being a portrait depicting a prominent figure from some country. This little girl's identity was not simple. It's best to be polite to these two. "We're from the Gabella Empire. My name is Betty Diaz, and I'm a wandering scholar. This is my bodyguard, Mary." "A scholar again?" Paul thought to himself. Do scholars dress like this? It's suspicious. Dressing like Miss Laddie is more normal. However, he didn't intend to meddle. Whether the woman was a runaway noblewoman or a royal descendant exiled to a foreign land, it was her freedom to come and go. If family members or enemies came knocking, let them handle it themselves. As long as it wasn't illegal, he wouldn't interfere. But if a kidnapping or murder occurred on his territory, he would definitely intervene, provided the other party's fists weren't bigger than his. Speaking of which, should a public security department be established to manage security within the territory? And who are these people? Just as Paul was pondering this, the blonde girl asked. "Oh, sorry, those on horseback are my men. The others are from the Lichman adventurer group from the south. By the way, it was this green-haired Miss Laddie who shot and killed that black-spotted tiger with her bow and arrow. Speaking of which, she's a scholar, just like you." Paul felt a pang of shame, having forgotten to introduce the person who had done the most merit. The two beauties bowed to the scholar lady in gratitude, their manners impeccable, further confirming Paul's suspicion that they came from noble families. The scholar lady returned the bow, her gaze lingering briefly on the blonde girl who claimed to be a scholar. The tall beauty asked, "Is there anywhere nearby to stay?" Paul raised his riding crop and pointed towards Lake Town. "Go east for another half a day's journey, and you'll reach Lake Town, where my residence is located. If you don't mind, you can come with us, then we'll trouble you, Earl." Back at their resting place, Queller, who had been waiting there, stared wide-eyed. This kid went out and brought back two beauties. Had some kind of cliché hero saves the damsel in distress scene unfolded? Paul had the two beauties and the rest of the Lichman adventurers' crew ride in the carriage, then ordered the entire army to assemble and continue their journey to Lake Town. The journey was uneventful. As evening approached, the group arrived at Lake Town. The soldiers were dismissed and given 2 hours of free time before returning to their barracks to rest. Quiller Foster and the rest of the adventurers' crew were arranged by Paul to rest at the Lord's castle. The two girls who had joined along the way asked him for directions to an inn, then took their leave and went to find lodging on their own. Really, wouldn't it have been better to just stay in my castle? It would have been much safer, Paul thought, shaking his head with a hint of regret. He entered the Lord's manor, where the castle steward, Philip, and the chief seal keeper, Ford, were already waiting to greet him. Paul cheerfully said to them, "Ah, you two, I've missed you both quite a bit these past few days. We've won a great victory." The two quickly offered their congratulations. "Congratulations, Earl, the Earl's military prowess is truly remarkable. Has everything been normal in Lakeside Town while I was away?" Steward Ford replied, "Everything is normal, sir. However, the Royal Commissioner who left some time ago has returned." Royal Commissioner? Paul was taken aback, then he realized, oh, it's Baron Hansel Abbott. I thought the Baron had been scared back to the capital by the pirates. Ha ha ha. What's he doing here? The Baron is usually stationed here as a representative of the royal family, but it seems he has important matters to discuss with you this time. Paul grimaced. I get angry just thinking about how he acted last time. Oh well, I'm magnanimous, I'll see him tomorrow. Steward Ford reported to Paul on a series of matters, including the sales of the new type of paper and the expansion of the paper mill. The situation was quite encouraging. If it could sell so well in the underdeveloped Northwest region, it would be even better if it could be transported to the wealthier areas. The three then discussed matters concerning Port Franklin, including the public trial, the establishment of a navy, the construction of ocean-going vessels, and opening the port to trade. They also mentioned rescuing Queller, the son of Marcus Foster of the Horn Alliance, from pirates. The steward's eyes lit up upon hearing this, and he strongly suggested that the Earl cultivate a good relationship with this young Master Foster. He reasoned that if they could establish a connection with the foster family, all the territory could sell its goods to the commercially developed South. Then, please invite young Master Foster to dinner tonight, and Steward Ford will also stay to join us, to further the friendship between our two families, the Earl decided. In a superior room at the only inn in Lakeside Town, the two beauties rescued by Laddie were staying. Your Highness, shall we set off eastward tomorrow? How about we stay here for a while, Leah? Indeed, these two were Princess Irene, the second princess of the Kingdom of Waldo, who had secretly run away from the capital, and her maid, Leah. Princess Eileen, upon learning that her father intended to marry her off to Duke Vedlin of the Eastern Frontier, decided to run away from home with her personal female bodyguard. The two originally planned to detour through the northeastern region to the Gabella Empire to seek refuge with their mother's family. However, they seemed to lack a knack for navigation, and ended up in the Northwest Bay. Fortunately, the princess had taken all her savings and jewelry with her before leaving home, so they didn't lack food or clothing along the way. Their clearly aristocratic attire and Leah's swordsmanship deterred many with ill intentions. Even so, for the princess, who had grown up in the palace in luxury, this long journey of over half a month had reached her limit. This morning, suspecting they were being followed, they galloped into the forest. While resting, they unfortunately encountered a black-spotted tiger. Their mounts fled in fright, leaving the two to confront the beast. Fortunately, Paul and his group, who were passing by, rescued them. Although her upbringing in the palace had allowed the little princess to maintain a semblance of composure, her already exhausted heart was finally on the verge of collapse. The tiger encounter had left her with considerable psychological trauma. Had it not been for a rescue, she and Leah would likely have been devoured by the beast. Continuing onward, they didn't know how many more dangers they would encounter, but returning to the capital to obey her father's arrangements was something the little princess absolutely refused to do. Let's stay in Lakeside Town for now. The Lord here doesn't seem like a bad person, and the place is remote and well-informed. If we hide well, it shouldn't be easy for the guys from the capital to find us. Leah thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. Then let's do that, Your Highness. Since staying in an inn isn't a long-term solution, and we'll have more contact with passing travelers, I'll wander around town tomorrow and see if I can buy a house to stay in, okay? Thank you for your hard work, Leah. Actually, the little princess had another reason for deciding to stay in Lakeside Town temporarily. With their poor sense of direction, continuing onward would probably take forever to reach the Gabella Empire. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49 Paper and Porcelain. The next day, Paul once again invited Queller Foster to the hall, accompanied by the rest of the Lichman adventurers. Queller guessed happily, "My friend, you're probably going to show me your little gadgets today, right?" "That's right." Paul snapped his fingers and called out loudly, "Bring them here." Two servants brought in 2 trays, each covered with a cloth, obscuring their contents. Queller grinned and said, Pretty mysterious, huh?" The adventurers also wore expressions of curiosity. "Watch closely." Paul suddenly lifted the cloth from the first tray. The first one, paper. The group was puzzled. All this secrecy just to show us paper? The adventurers' leader, Meru, looked furious. "Is the Lord playing a trick on us?" Paul shook his finger and said, "Don't be impatient, everyone. This paper of mine is extraordinary. It's not made of parchment, but of very cheap raw materials. Moreover, the production process is simple, saving a lot of manpower and material costs, and the price is far lower than parchment." Queller had heard Paul talk about the new type of paper in Flanders, so he wasn't too surprised. He picked up a piece of paper and kept rubbing it, praising, "This paper is indeed good. It can replace parchment. If it can be mass-produced as you said the other day, the prospects should be very promising. By the way, what is it made of?" Paul flatly refused. "Sorry, it's a trade secret. I can't reveal it even if you're my friend, HMPH. How stingy." "What's on the second tray?" Paul lifted the cloth on the second tray. "Everyone, open your eyes wide and look carefully. I call this porcelain." "Wow," everyone exclaimed in surprise when they saw what was on the tray. "This is a porcelain dish, pure white and crystal clear." That's everyone's first impression upon seeing it. Similar to medieval Europe, Most people in this world used earthenware, those with better means used metalware like bronze, and the upper class used silver. However, no matter how well maintained, metalware always suffers from rust, losing its original shine after a while. Porcelain, on the other hand, is much more appealing, its beauty far surpassing that of the drab earthenware and bronze. Paul proudly introduced it. How about it? Beautiful, right? And it won't rust. Europeans went to great lengths to obtain the secret formula for making porcelain. Finally, the French missionary Perry and Trecollet infiltrated JDZ, spending over a decade to acquire the raw materials and formula, sending them all the way back to Europe. After that, Westerners were finally able to produce their own porcelain comparable to Chinese porcelain. In fact, the core secret of porcelain lies in two things: kaolin, or magnetite, and high temperature. Fortunately, kaolin was discovered not far from the town of Huxon. Paul recruited a group of potters, built a kiln, and began experimentally firing porcelain. Initially, things didn't go well because temperature control was difficult. Firing porcelain required temperatures above 1,200 degrees Celsius. To solve this problem, Paul commissioned a glassmaker to create the world's first mercury thermometer. Although it had some error, it was barely usable. Of course, it wasn't used directly in the kiln to measure the temperature, otherwise it would have exploded. Furthermore, the mercury thermometer couldn't reach a measurement range above 400 degrees Celsius. Using the thermometer to measure the temperature around the kiln, combined with Paul's recollection of the spitting temperature measurement method, spitting into the kiln opening, where the saliva condenses into tiny, jumping droplets before evaporating, and judging the temperature by the height of these droplets, he finally achieved a consistently high temperature above 1,200 degrees Celsius. Before firing, another important step was glazing. Without glazing, porcelain could still be fired, but it would be rougher. The glaze was made by mixing clay water with wood ash, stirring until evenly mixed, and then filtering before use. This step greatly affected the appearance of the finished product, but it wasn't a major concern during the trial production. The artisans needed to gradually develop perfect glazing techniques. When Paul recaptured Fulton Harbor, the artisans of Lakeside Town, after numerous experiments, finally produced their first batch of decent-looking porcelain. The porcelain dish in front of them was one of these prototypes. It didn't have the beautiful paintings common on Earth's porcelain because the pigment formulas for coloring porcelain were closely guarded secrets. Paul was afraid that mixing the wrong pigments would affect the firing process, so the prototypes weren't painted. The priority was to solve the problem of having the product at all. The painting techniques would be left for the artisans to research. The prototypes weren't perfect, they had many flaws and were far from flawless, but they were already enough to impress Quill and the otherworldly natives. You're going to sell this kind of thing? Quill asked excitedly. Paul nodded proudly and replied, "Of course, this is just an early experimental product, with many flaws, far from perfect. The ones I'll sell in the future will be much more beautiful, decorated with all sorts of exquisite patterns," the young master of the Foster family exclaimed. This will cause a storm. Even though Quill disliked the family business, he had still inherited some business acumen. Seeing the members of the Lichman adventurer group staring blankly at the porcelain plate, Paul announced loudly, "I hereby declare that everyone present will receive a sample of the porcelain. I will issue a certificate in the name of the Gleman family, proving that these are the first porcelain pieces in the world. Although these samples are far from perfect, if they sell well, their collectible value will be immeasurable." Dean, a member of the adventurer group, hurriedly said, "How can this be? This is too valuable, we can't accept it." Ouch! Dean's foot was stomped hard by the group leader, Mayru. Mayru looked at Paul with an expression of adoration and said, "Lord Gleman, I'm so sorry. I deeply regret my previous misunderstanding of you. You're neither lecherous nor cowardly. You're actually a generous, kind, and compassionate person who cares for his people." Paul crossed his arms, puffed out his chest, and said, "HMPH. You've finally seen my true self. Wait a minute, was that the image you had of me before? Oh well, I'm happy today, so I'll let it go." He put on a stern face. "This isn't a freebie, you know. When you return to the south, you must spread the word for me." Queller and Mayru readily agreed. "One guaranteed, our merchants will definitely be vying for your agency rights." The other's eyes lit up. "We're rich." "We're rich, the son of a powerful figure in the council. And a renowned adventurers group, that should generate considerable advertising." Chapter 50, I must cling to powerful backer. Rewind a few days. In a tavern in a small town in a neighboring territory of Arda, Baron Hansel Abbott was drinking with a man dressed as a merchant. Times are tough. The man opposite him put down his cup and pulled a roll of parchment from his pocket, handing it to the Baron. "So, this is our new mission." Hansel took the roll, unfolded it, and glanced at it. "Collecting provisions?" I remember the officials managing the granaries in the capital always boasted that their grain could last for over a year. Could it have been eaten up in such a short time by those few thousand men of Hals? The merchant-dressed liaison hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "The warehouse caught fire." "Oh, no wonder," Hansel nodded. "It was most likely the work of spies." "Speaking of which, Your Excellency, why are you here? Shouldn't you be in Lakeside Town?" "I went to great lengths to find you," the liaison asked curiously. Ahem. Hansel cleared his throat, trying to control his racing heart so his face wouldn't turn red. "The territory of Arda is suffering from pirate attacks, and as the representative of the royal family, I naturally can't stand idly by. That's why I'm here to procure supplies and weapons for the Lord." He couldn't say that he was scared here by the pirates. The liaison officer gave a thumbs up. "Impressive. So, you deserve some credit for Count Gleman's success in quelling the pirates." Now it was Hansel's turn to be puzzled. "Quell the pirates?" the liaison officer said. "Hasn't Count Gleman informed you yet?" "When I came to Lakeside Town to find you, the people there had already spread the word that the Count had led his troops to recapture Fland Harbor and hanged a large number of pirates. I heard he'll be returning to Lakeside Town soon." "Really? Looks like I can go back to Lakeside Town too." Hansel looked delighted, but in his heart he thought, that little Count is really capable. "Before I left, I was attacked right at my doorstep," he continued, "but as you know, I have to wait for Lord Gleman's formal notification before I can return. I expect the notification will arrive soon. I'll ask that you take good care of the provisions, Your Excellency." "Of course," Hansel readily agreed. The liaison officer suddenly remarked, "I often travel to this northwest region, and it's rare to see a lord like Earl Gleman who cares so much for his people. The coast has been ravaged by pirates for many years." Hansel scoffed inwardly, quite unconvinced. He immediately changed the subject. "So, how's the situation in the south?" The liaison officer shook his head. "The grain has all been burned. What else can be done?" Please don't tell anyone about this, but it'll probably be all over the world soon. I didn't go into the city with the army, but I could see the raging fire from miles outside. It can't be hidden." Hansel frowned. "So, the army sent to quell the rebellion can't be moved south immediately, isn't there a saying? An army marches on its stomach. Now that the supplies are gone, how can we fight? I guess we can only send a small force to help Duke Dodge hold the Thorn Pass, and we'll be lucky if Giles doesn't get to the north." The liaison officer looked pessimistic and continued, "Fortunately, it seems that the force attacking the Thorn Pass isn't Giles' main force." He suddenly shuddered and hurriedly said, "Baron, I was a bit drunk just now and started talking nonsense, please." Hansel smiled and raised his glass to him. "I'm always tight-lipped." "To His Majesty the King." The liaison officer also raised his glass. "To His Majesty the King." Had Giles' main force not marched north? They must be dealing with those disobedient lords in the south. If the royal army couldn't march south in time, Giles, with his strength, would only be able to let those lords fend for themselves. If the rebels then consolidated all the southern territories, it would be even more difficult to deal with. The situation is dire. Hansel sighed inwardly, resolving to visit the young Count again. Back to the present, in the study of the Lord's mansion in Lakeside Town, the intelligence chief, Cecil, was reporting his work results. "Sir, as per your request, our intelligence personnel have begun working in the capital. However, due to inexperience and the martial law of the past period, we didn't gather much information. Now, we finally have some results." He respectfully handed Paul a stack of documents. Let me take a look." Paul skimmed through the information, not really concerned with the capital's intelligence. The situation in the northwest was already keeping him busy enough, but as a vassal of the Kingdom of Waldo, it was necessary to have a general understanding of the latest national events. "Holy crap, this is terrible. The granaries have been burned down." Paul was shocked, recalling what Queller had told him in Port Flander. Giles had powerful backing, while the royal family was suffering repeated losses. First, their capital was stolen, and after finally recovering it, they lost a large amount of grain. Could the royal family really be in trouble this time? Paul wondered if he should write a letter of pledge of allegiance to Giles. As a transmigrator, He didn't have much loyalty to the Rodney dynasty. He didn't care who wore the crown, as long as it didn't affect his Industrial Revolution plans. Once his factories were built, they would all be feudal garbage swept into the corners of history. However, Cecil's next intelligence report dispelled his thoughts. Your Excellency, with the spread of the new paper, quite a few people have been secretly eyeing us, Cecil said, handing over a second intelligence report. Paul was alarmed and carefully examined the second report, as it concerned a vital source of revenue for the Arda territory. Robbers. Thieves. Shameful. After reading the report, Paul waved his hand, angrily shouting at the despicable villains lurking in the shadows. The report indicated that several forces were attempting to steal the paper-making technology, including several powerful merchant guilds and even lords from neighboring territories, such as the Earl of Kenton Emden and Viscount Johnston and Bordeaux. Fortunately, Paul had repeatedly emphasized secrecy and maintained strict defenses, and the high wages he paid his workers had fostered sufficient loyalty, preventing the paper-making technology from being stolen. However, the long-term consequences were uncertain. It wasn't that Paul wanted to monopolize paper-making indefinitely, the technology was actually quite simple and would eventually be learned by others. But this concerned Paul's first pot of gold, and in the early stages, he needed to rely on a monopoly to accumulate some capital. Paul actually welcomed the spread of new technologies, otherwise, he could never have achieved industrialization on his own, even if he struggled his entire life. However, there was a prerequisite: it had to be within his control. He didn't want his enemies to develop airplanes and missiles first, only to have him blown to bits. But the involvement of neighboring lords made things more complicated. He instructed Cecil, "Notify Butler Philip to invite Baron Hansel Abbott to my residence." He couldn't worry about anything else now, he needed to find a powerful patron to rely on. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.